Good morning. This is Today in Parliament. I'm Julian Reid. It's Wednesday, June 6th, and today we expect to hear the second reading and the beginning of the debate on the 2018-2019 budget. House members are expected to detail the allocations and priorities for their ministries over the next fiscal year. Of course, the 2018-2019 fiscal year begins on July 1st. Now, after the budget bills are passed in the House of Assembly, they will have to be debated and passed in the Senate, and then receive the assent of the Governor-General. Again, all this must happen before July 1st. Well, let's take a look at some of the key aspects that Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance Peter Turnquest, who is the member for East Grand Bahama, highlighted in his budget communication last week in the House. One of the government's key revenue-generating measures will be raising VAT to 12%.
The bottom line is that we must pay off the massive backlog of arrears, judiciously finance our policy agenda, meet our deficit targets, and set the stage for the pending reductions in customs duties. That is a more daunting fiscal policy challenge, indeed, that requires decisive and difficult policy actions. To address the challenges, we are proposing a 3-year fiscal strategy that will allow us to both deal with the assorted fiscal pressures that we face in 2018-19 and beyond, and meet the deficit targets each year. As a core component of that strategy, as mentioned earlier, is a number of enhanced revenue measures in the form of an increase in taxes and fees, and enhanced revenue collection efforts, targeting critically needed new revenues. The incremental revenue gains will permit execution of the government's 3-year fiscal plan as follows. In year 1, we will pay off $170 million in old bills and finally budget properly for current known commitments. Yes. I know you don't want to hear that. I know you don't hear that, but that's a fact. In year 2, we will pay over $100 million in additional arrears and begin to implement reductions in customs and excise duties to rebalance the tax burden between the provision of goods and services and reduce the attendant distortionary impacts. And in year 3, we will substantially complete the payment of arrears and make further significant reductions in customs and excise duties. To facilitate this, we are proposing a number of measures that are designed to generate additional revenue to the government. Specifically, we are increasing the taxation of gaming house activities through the introduction of a sliding scale of rates applied to taxable revenue, namely up to $20 million, a rate of 20%. Between $20 million and $40 million, a rate of 25%. Between $40 million and $60 million, a rate of 30%. Between $60 million and $80 million, a rate of 35%. Between $80 million and $100 million, a rate of 40%. And over $100 million, a rate of 50%. Also, the taxation of gaming patrons through a 5% stamp tax to be levied on both deposits made by patrons at the gaming houses and any non-online games or digital sales. An increase in various immigration fees, introduction of new port fees, the real property tax on foreign-owned vacant land is increasing from 2% of value up from 1.5%. Licensing fees on large commercial vehicles increased by $50 from Class B for Class B and Class C vehicles. And increases to police records fees, fingerprinting fees for casinos, and labor certificate fees. Most substantially, Mr. Speaker, the government, this is the line you wanted to hear. Most substantially, Mr. Speaker, the government is proposing an increase in the rate of value-added tax from the current 7.5% to 12%, effective July 1.
Well, Mr. Turnquest also detailed tax relief measures the government will offer.
We are eliminating VAT on all bread basket items. And yes, Mr. Minister, with the exception of sugar. As sugar, for health reasons, is planned to be removed from the list of bread basket items. This would mean the elimination of VAT on the following items: butter, yes. Cooking oil, mayonnaise, yes. Grits, yes. Cheese, corned beef, there will be no attacking the corned beef. No attacks on corned beef. Evaporated milk, margarine, rice, flour, bread, tomato paste, baby cereal, baby formula, soups, broths, baby food, power detergents, condensed milk, soaps, fresh milk, and mustard. Mustard too? Mustard too. We are eliminating VAT on medicines. Yes. We are eliminating VAT on medicines. Oh, yeah. We are eliminating VAT on residential property insurance. And I want to read that one again. Yes. We are eliminating VAT on residential property insurance. Yes. We are waiving VAT on residential electricity bills at or under $100 and water bills at or under $50. And as I indicated, this will help the most vulnerable in our communities. You want me to read it again? We are waiving VAT on residential electricity bills at or under $100 and water bills at or under $50. For clarity, this is not for the first $100 or $50 in a person's bill, but it is targeted those bills which come in at or under the stated amounts. For electricity customers, this will impact over 30,000 BPL households alone. How many? 30,000 households will be assisted, aided by this exemption. Water customers. For water customers, this will impact over 43,000 Water and Sewage Corporation customers. 43,000 average and below average income homes will be assisted with this necessary utility. This waiver will be applicable to all licensed utilities in the country. So that includes Grand Bahama Power and Grand Bahama Water Utility Company. Yes. So Grand Bahama, we haven't forgot about you. Spanish Wells too. We are increasing the customs personal travel exemption from $300 to $500 per person. We are increasing the customs personal travel exemption from $300 to $500 per person. Twice a year. Twice a year. We are providing for the value-added tax zero rating of fundraising activities held by charitable organizations. We are implementing various concessions in respect of real property tax, customs duties, excise duties, business license fees, and stamp tax in favor of designated economic empowerment zones, beginning with the over-the-hill communities. What do you say, Baintown? Engliston, your time coming. The Fox still coming too. It's the people's time. We are providing for the waiver of duty on clothing and shoe imports upon application by importers and retailers of the same. This will be extended to any merchant, large or small, who has a business license for the sale of clothes and shoes. So if you have a business, retail business, selling clothing or shoes, you can apply to the government to bring in your supplies duty-free. Nice. But it is expected that you will pass it on. You're getting a little ahead of me. We are at the same time, Mr. Speaker, putting in place procedures to ensure that these savings are passed on to the customers. I think that is worth saying again. We are at the same time, in giving these concessions, putting in place procedures to ensure that the savings are passed on to the consumers. This will be a benefit to all Bahamians, but particularly to those who do not have the means to travel abroad to shop for their clothes like others are sometimes able to do. We help in our own. People stuff. We are providing duty-free, that's a good point. You can't shop online and get the exemption. You only get the exemption if you have a business license from the government of the Bahamas. And so you will not be able to benefit from duty exemption from the Amazons and all the rest of them of the world. All right? And again, we are taking that stance to protect the Bahamian retailer. Yes. We are providing duty-free entry for goods for use in the commercial printing industry, as well as for processing and garment manufacturing equipment without the need to apply for specific concessions as before. We are extending for 1 year both the City of Nassau Revitalization Act and the Family Island Development Encouragement Act. Yes. We are extending for 5 years the first-time homeowners stamp exemption. 5 years. We are extending for 2 years the duty exemption on materials used for the renovation, repair, and upgrade of dilapidated buildings. Yes. We are eliminating duties on a number of food products, including whole salmon. How do you all like that one? Whole salmon. Frozen fish fillets. Bread spreads. Potato products, snappers included. I had to do fresh fish. Tofu, and prepared and preserved tomatoes. We are eliminating duties on solar kits upon application to the Ministry of Finance. Yes. Presently, solar panels are duty-free. And this new allowance will mean the vendors or individuals who are bringing in full solar kits can have all related elements bought in duty-free. And of course, you know that is a matter that is near and dear to the heart of the Prime Minister when he speaks about solarization. And so we're going to facilitate your vision, Mr. Prime Minister.
Thank you. Thank you. You're a good man.
Say that again.
That needs repeating. Say it one more time,
We are reducing duties on floor tiles and fabric softeners. We are extending the 0.75% business license fee rate, currently applicable to hotels with turnovers over $400 million, to all hotels with 10 rooms or more, so that smaller Bahamian-owned hotels can take advantage of the concessions that were offered to larger foreign-owned properties. We're looking out for Bahamians. We are extending the duty exemption to church buses 8 years old or less from the current limitation that limit the concession to buses that are 3 years old or less. You can go there in a modern bus. We are providing an exemption from business license fees for all schools that are registered with the Ministry of Education. And we are eliminating the duty on airplanes and helicopters in an effort to build an airplane registry industry within the country. And I know my friend will have something to say about that. For both me and you, Caroline. Both me and you. Both me and you. So make sure when she attacks me, she attacks you too. But Mr. Speaker, this is in furtherance of our determination to build an airplane registry industry within the country, which we believe can provide substantial new revenue and business.
And here are the fiscal projections for 2018-2019.
As for the fiscal projections for 2018-19, recurrent expenditure will amount to $2,589 million, an increase of $346 million from the budgeted amount in 2017-18. This increase includes the $172 million in arrears that will be paid in the coming year. The $76 million increase as a result of the adoption of full and proper budgeting for known commitments across the breadth and scope of government expenditure. Some $19 million for the new recurrent expenditure policy initiatives that I previously discussed, and $89 million for additional interest payments. Y'all hear what I said? No. Let me tell you, because this is where your VAT money is going, and this is important. This is important, Mr. Speaker. This is where the VAT money is going. Well, maybe they stop listening so you can carry the message, because you should be listening.
Fiscal responsibility. Fiscal responsibility.
As for the projections for 2018-19, recurrent expenditure will amount to $2,589 million, an increase of $346 million from the budgeted amount in 2017-18. This increase includes the $117 million in arrears that will be paid in the coming year. That means bills that have been amassing and not being paid for years. It includes some of the legal judgments against the government that have not been paid for years. National insurance that has not been paid in years. BEC bills who have not been paid in years. Water and sewage and all the rest, Mr. Speaker. The $76 million increase as a result of the adoption of full... Yeah, parliamentarians got to pay their water bill. The $76 million increase as a result of the adoption of full and proper budgeting for known commitments across the breadth and scope of government expenditures. In other words, The lunch vendors can get paid on time. The contractors can get paid on time. Because we would have provided for those expenditures, and not like others who make commitments with no idea how they're going to pay for it. Some $19 million for new recurrent expenditure policy initiatives that I previously discussed. That's the Over the Hill initiative and the small business development and all the rest of it, $19 million. 19. And $89 million for additional interest payments. And that is important. $89 million for additional interest payments that does not inure to the immediate benefit of Bahamians. That's just to pay interest on loans and debt that has been amassed for years by the Bahamian people, by their government, sorry, on the backs of the Bahamian people, because they did not want to face realities and live within their means or do what is necessary to correct the picture. The level of capital expenditure in 2018-19 is set at $299 million, up $69 million from $230 million in 2017-18. Demands for new investments in public infrastructure clearly exceeds the amounts that is allocated for next year, and the government does want to prioritize such investments as a means of boosting potential economic growth. However, the fiscal realities of the day dictate that we scale back the allocation to a level that is fiscally justifiable, at least in the near term. The outlook for recurrent revenue in the coming fiscal year is governed to a large extent by the fiscal impact of both the revenue measures that we are proposing in this budget, as well as the impact of the rise in the rate of VAT. The lesser revenue measures include adjustments up and down, are estimated to produce a net gain in revenue of some $100 million, while the VAT increase should net new revenue to the tune of some $400 million. As a result, after factoring the growth of the economy and targeted gains from enhanced revenue collections, total recurrent revenue in 2018-19 is estimated at a level of $2,649 million, or 20.1% of GDP. That is an improvement in the revenue yield of 4 percentage points from the level of 16.1% posted in 2017-18. While still lagging behind regional norms, such a level of revenue yield is definitely more reasonable in relation to the needs of modern government and to the needs of our citizens who demand more and more services and support from the government. The GFS deficit of 2018-19 is therefore projected at $237 million, some $73 million lower than in 2017-18. At 1.8% of GDP, the deficit will come in at the target that will be mandated in the fiscal responsibility legislation. That's important, Mr. Speaker. The GFS deficit in 2018-19 is therefore projected at $237 million, some $73 million lower than in 2017-2018. At 1.8% of GDP, the deficit will come in at the target that will be mandated in the fiscal responsibility legislation. We are walking the walk, Mr. Speaker. With the decline in the size of the deficit and the ongoing growth of nominal GDP, the debt to GDP ratio is projected to fall to 56.1% in 2018-2019, down from 57.2% in 2017-2018. In the outer years of 2019, 2020, and 2021, the growth of primary recurrent expenditure is being held to 2.5% per year. Recurrent expenditure from year to year is being held to 2.5% growth. As such, this category of discretionary spending will decline from 16.8% of GDP in 2018-19 to 15.4% of GDP in 2021. Capital expenditure over the forecast horizon is projected to grow by 2.5% per year. The projection for recurrent revenue beyond 2018-19 assumes that the revenue yield of the tax system remains constant at its level of 20.1% of GDP in 2018-19. On the basis of these planning assumptions, the GFS deficit in 1920 is projected at $85 million, or 0.6% of GDP. In 2020 and 2021, a GFS surplus, listen carefully so you tell the whole story. In 2021 fiscal year, a GFS surplus of some $10 million is forecasted. As such, we will readily achieve the deficit targets for those 2 years. And as I indicated when I first spoke, we will come here with a black briefcase, signaling a surplus. In addition, the debt to GDP ratio will decline steadily over the forecast period to stand at 52.1% at the end of 2020-2021.
Mr. Turnquest called the upcoming budget a landmark one that will bring an end to fiscal irresponsibility.
The era of fiscal irresponsibility has come to an end. And as we promised, Bahamians, fiscal discipline will henceforth prevail. With this budget, we have introduced a legally binding framework that obligates us to adhere to a mandated schedule of continuous deficit reduction, and that will prevent any future government from ever engaging in reckless fiscal management and excessive deficit financing. Our government has hit the ground running in developing this budget within the full constraints of the new fiscal responsibility legislation. Quite frankly, with the evolving fiscal pressures that we confront, in respect of both recurrent and capital expenditure, the looming downward pressure on recurrent revenue, as well as the dire need to clear out the massive arrears left behind by the previous government, the task this year has been particularly challenging. Very difficult decisions have had to be made in respect of expenditure allocations, with a decisive focus on the areas of highest priority within our policy agenda. Equally difficult decisions have also had to be made in respect of revenue measures. Moving to significantly enhance the revenue yield of our tax system was not done capriciously, but rather out of a deep sense of responsibility for righting the ship of state and restoring the fiscal health of the people's government. This day of fiscal reckoning inevitably had to come and has fallen to our government to tackle it with decisiveness and determination. Mr. Speaker, I am proud to assert that we willingly took up the challenge, and that as a result of the 2018-2019 budget stands as a true testament of our resolve and determination.
Another highlight of the budget communication is the Digital Bahamas initiative.
Government has been in discussions with the IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank, on a project that we refer to as the Digital Bahamas Initiative. The main objective of this project is to foster the country's competitiveness by reducing the cost of conducting business with the government. This general objective will be accomplished by achieving the following specific objectives: streamlining government procedures and making them available online to reduce the cost of government bureaucracy, increasing the use of ICTs in the public sector, and increasing transparency of government activities and strengthening auditing and control mechanisms. These three principal components of the project will focus on simplifying and digitizing government procedures, strengthening institutional capacity for a digital government, and enhancing transparency and integrity in government. As for results, the project is expected to lead to a reduction in the time and cost of government procedures, an increase in the data shared and used across government offices for policy design and government management, an improvement in the quality and quantity of government information published and its use by citizens, and the establishment of a single national identity number and identity card, presumptively using the current NIB ID number, that will allow for ease in transacting business in the public and private spheres of the country. We expect to finalize the details of this new project early in the new fiscal year. The net result of this will be a reduction in the processes and paperwork and the means to conduct government business more efficiently. Simply put, as the private sector and the rest of the world is doing, we will make use of technology to deliver public services cheaper, faster, and better. The government will also provide support to the central bank's current move towards a digital form of Bahamian currency, as well as support the effort of the central bank and the commercial banking sector to move towards a cashless society. Our ambition is no less than to make the Bahamas a regional leader and then a world leader in the utilization of digital technology for the benefits of our citizens. In so doing, we shall catapult the Bahamas ahead of many of its contemporaries and create opportunities and efficiencies for all Bahamians. Mr. Speaker, in addition, the government is striving to transform its state-owned enterprises, or SOEs, into self-sufficient entities. As was laid out in the budget communication last year, funding in the amount of $429 million was provided for 25 SOEs in the 2017-2018 fiscal year, representing an increase of $79 million from the previous fiscal year. In light of the critical priority being attached to fiscal consolidation, such a drain on the public finances must clearly be rationalized. To that end, the government has directed each state-owned enterprise to begin looking at a move towards a cost recovery operating model, which might include a mix of revenue enhancement initiatives, as well as measures to reduce expenditure in line with industry benchmarks. The SOEs are now formulating articulated strategies that we expect will take them to this optimized point within 3 to 5 years.
Well, debt management legislation will also be enacted. Here's what Mr. Turnquest had to say about that.
As well, Mr. Speaker, we are proceeding with the preparation of new debt management legislation that is also targeted for tabling in the period ahead. To that end, the Central Bank has approached the Commonwealth Secretariat to provide technical assistance for drafting appropriate legislation to modernize our public debt management infrastructure. Work to date suggests the establishment of a new framework consistent with international best practices that is designed to support a properly functioning debt management regime. That framework would include, for further consideration and possible implementation, the establishment of a public debt management unit responsible for debt management activities, the establishment of a public debt management advisory committee to guide the government's borrowing policies and debt management operations, the establishment of a public debt management strategy in line with the government's fiscal policy and budget framework, with which all borrowing and other debt management activities would need to comply. The establishment of mandatory requirements for reporting to Parliament by the Minister of Finance, including on the performance of debt management relative to the strategy, as well as on all guarantees issued by the government, and the provision of external audit requirements for all debt management activities. As an additional measure to manage debt more responsibly, the government has established a sinking fund to accommodate the repayment of the recent $750 million international bond issue, and will contribute some $39 million to that fund in the 2018-19 fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, it virtually goes without saying that with the level of unemployment in this country and the annual rate of increase of our labor force, it is critically important that we succeed in boosting the rate of growth of our economy. We have been steadfast in our commitment to the goals, as it will bring significant benefits not only in terms of new and expanding job opportunities, but also in respect of contributing to our plan for fiscal consolidation. Mr. Speaker, that brings me to the matter of the ease of doing business in this country. All will know that we have not fared favorably in the annual country rankings of the ease of doing business developed by the World Bank. Indeed, in the latest 2018 rankings, which are based on data at the midpoint of 2017, we placed 119 out of 190 countries, with our worst showing in respect of registering property, where we actually placed 167th, followed by trading across borders with a 157th ranking. Improving the ease of doing business in this country is therefore a core component of our strategy to bolster Bahamian entrepreneurship, investment, and economic growth. In our manifesto, we were explicit that we would progress public sector reform to create an efficient public service committed to improving the ease of doing business with the government. And shortly after coming to office, we followed through on that commitment with the establishment of a private sector-led committee to develop recommendations for improvements in the ease of doing business in this country. As a key element of that initiative, the Ministry of Finance formed a cross-agency committee to examine how to make the business license application process faster, easier, and more efficient. The committee consisted of representatives from finance and the major government agencies responsible for issuing approvals required to open a business. That is, the Department of Physical Planning, the Ministry of Works, the Department of Environmental Health Services, and the Royal Bahamas Police Force. The ultimate goal of the committee was to streamline the entire business license process, to allow much faster approval times through greater use of digital platforms that will support integration of systems between agencies for complete online services. Our focus has been on making the system faster, easier, and better. To that end, we are making the business license system faster by shortening the time required to secure both new and renewed licenses. Easier, stress-free, and more citizen-centered by focusing greater interagency cooperation to facilitate the acquisition of licenses, and better through improved service delivery via a single point of contact. Upon completion in early 2019, the new system will also include the complete integration of systems between agencies and complete online services, including the submission of applications and the reservation of business names through the Office of the Registrar General. We are also reviewing the recommendations of the Ease of Doing Business Committee in respect of other areas of concern. In response, we are making administrative changes to procedures as well as introducing, as appropriate, proposed amendments to legislation to address those concerns.
Well, if you take a look at your screens right now, you can see that some members of the House of Assembly are in position. It is after 10 o'clock, so they're just a little bit late. But we can see that the gallery is full. All of the media people are there. Of course, this is a very, very important time, the most critical time in the year of Parliament, as all of the important business for the next financial year will be discussed. And as we said, we will understand more about the budget. The communication was made last week by the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister. But as each member of Parliament, particularly those who have cabinet portfolios, give their communications, we will find out a little bit more about the allocations and specifically how they intend to use them to the benefit of the Bahamian people. Well, we expect them to get started any minute now, but in the meantime, Mr. Turnquest also highlighted developments and prospects for the Bahamian economy. Listen to this.
The Department of Statistics recently released its estimates of gross domestic product for 2017, as well as revisions for the previous 4 years. The rate of real economic growth last year is estimated to have been 1.4%, as had been projected at the time of the last budget. In addition, the historical revisions suggest that the size of our economy is in current dollar terms was some $577 million larger in 2016 than had been estimated last year, a development that is reflected in GDP estimates for 2017 at just over $12 billion. These revisions, of course, affect the fiscal ratios for the weight of both the deficit and debt relative to GDP that are presented in this communication and in the supporting documentation. As such, they are especially relevant in the context of the government's fiscal policy planning in relation to the achievement of the fiscal targets set out in the eminent Fiscal Responsibility Bill. I'm tempted. but I just want the member for Angleston to know the last 5 years showed real recession, real economic loss, Mr. Speaker.
And those figures were right.
And those figures were right. The relatively modest rebound in real economic growth in 2017 was driven primarily by buoyant activity in the construction sector as a result of completion work on the Bahama Resort and other foreign investment projects, as well as hurricane-related reconstruction activity. However, other private sector construction work remained relatively subdued as the commercial banks maintained prudent lending policies. Reflecting this, total mortgage disbursements for new construction and repairs shrank by 3.4% in 2017, on the heels of a 6.7% contraction in 2016. The performance of the tourism sector was muted in 2017, reflecting severe weather-related travel disruptions, the hurricane-related reduction in hotel capacity in Grand Bahama, and enhanced competition from competitor destinations. Following growth of 2.5% in 2016, total visitor arrivals contracted by 2.1% last year on the basis of reductions in both air and sea arrivals by 4% and 1.5% respectively. The persistent and long-standing relatively flat performance of the air and stay-over segments of the tourism market is particularly troubling, as that is the portion that makes the most significant contribution to the growth of value added in the tourism industry. And that's changing. Getting better. The lackluster performance of this market last year was reflected, for instance, in the performance of the large hotel properties in New Providence and Paradise Island, where the average occupancy rate declined by 10% to 60.7%. However, despite this development, total room revenue was largely unchanged on the basis of increased room inventory. In contrast, there are now indications that the performance of the tourism sector rebounded somewhat more buoyantly in the first quarter of 2018 and that this improvement will be sustained. I understand Baintown is integral to that. The labor market posted improved performance in 2017 in line with emerging... The labor market posted improved performance in 2017 in line with the emerging rebound in economic growth. The key driving factors in this improvement were the phased opening of Bahama Resort, hurricane-related construction activity, and a number of international cultural events. The Department of Statistics reports that between November 2016 and November 2017, total employment increased by 11,345 to a total of 203,730. This growth in employment surpasses the 4.1% expansion in the labor force during this period, the latter reflecting both the entry of new graduates into the labor market and a 2,000 decrease in the number of discouraged workers. As a result, the national rate of unemployment in November last year stood at 10.1%.
Well, as you can see, they are ready to begin today's proceedings in the House of Assembly, so we take you there live, and we'll be back for commentary after this morning's proceedings.
55, 22 to 33. Cast your cares on the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never let the righteous fall. But you, O God, will bring down the wicked into the pit of corruption. Bloodthirsty and deceitful men will not live out half their days. But as for me, I trust in you. Proverbs 35 to 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we praise and bless thy holy name. We thank you for your faithfulness. Therefore we can say, great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto us. James 1:5 says, if any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to him. Dear Lord, our honorable members need your wisdom to deal effectively with this year's budget. May their discussions bring about solutions to the financial challenges which we face as a nation yesterday, today, and tomorrow. We surrender this nation to you, dear Lord, for you said in Psalms 33:12, blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, the people he chose for his inheritance. May our leaders surrender their lives, their families, and this nation unto your capable care and keeping. Guide them, precious Holy Spirit, in their discussions today. In Jesus' name, amen. Honorable members, together we pray. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Thine is the kingdom, power, and glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Dr. Hubert Minnis, Peter Turnquist, Brent Simonette, Desmond Bannister, Renwood Wells, Jeffrey Lloyd, Michael Rowe, Alfred Johnson, Philip Davis, Juan Miller, Lakeisha Parker Edgecombe, Iram Lewis, Carlton Boleg, James Aubrey, Travis Robinson, Adrian Gibson, Donald Saunders, Frederick McAlpine, Hank Johnson, Mark Humes, Michael Folks, Miriam Rafi Emmanuel, Reese Chipman, Reuben Rami, Ricky Mackey, Shannon Dawn Cartwright, Charnel Ferguson, Glennis Hannah Martin, Faisal Forbes, Chester Cooper.
Good morning, honorable members. As we embark on our labor this morning on behalf of the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, we are reminded of the sad occasion that occurred at the Sir Randall Fox Labor Day March, which resulted in the deaths of Tabitha Shelley Hay, Catherine Augusta Fernanda, Tammy Patrice Gibson, and Miss Diane Elizabeth Gray Ferguson, reportedly all of whom were members of the Bahamas Financial Services Union, the BFSU. We wish to take this opportunity to, first of all, thank the Minister of Labor for the manner in which he conducted himself on that occasion, the Leader of the Opposition also for the manner in which he conducted himself, and in particular, we want to thank the Minister of Health, who seemed to have been engaged from the very moment the tragedy occurred. And at this time, I would request that we all stand in a moment of silence. Thank you, honorable members and members of the gallery. May the souls of the departed rest in peace, and may God's speed and health and anointing spirit be engaged upon those who remain convalescing in hospital. We pray for their speedy recovery. At this time, we also would like to recognize some special people in our gallery. I want to begin by recognizing His Excellency, Mr. Maurice Moore, who is accompanied by his lovely wife, Mistress Sandra Moore. Can you stand for us, please? Of course, we all know that Mr. Moore is a founding member of the Free National Movement and of the modern Bahamas. He has spent more than 50 years in public life in the Bahamas, and he was first elected in 1967 at the age of 26. In 1997, Mr. Moore was appointed the Bahamas ambassador to the United Nations, a position he held until the year 2002. Currently, Mr. Moore serves as on the advisory committee for the northern region of Abaco, Grand Bahama, Bimini, and the Berry Islands. Of the three remaining founding fathers of the Free National Movement, Mr. Moore remains the only active member at this time of his life, and we wish him Godspeed and good health. Thank you very much, Mr. Moore, for the services that you've rendered to the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. We also have in our midst this morning a group from the Eva Hilton Primary School. Can you stand for us? We have in our midst the principal, Mr. Jermaine Burrows, or Butler, correction, Ms. Karen Richardson, Mr. Mara Seymour, Mr. Remington Menace, and today we want to especially recognize the Student of the Year in the primary school, Mr. Remington Menace. And we also want to recognize the Eva Hilton Primary School as being the second government school to have won since Carmichael Primary won in 1999. I understand that this school is known for its achievement in academics, having attained a better than 2-point average by more than 90% of the students. I think they should be congratulated. And of course, the student hails from the good constituency of St. Barnabas. And at this time, I recognize, the chair recognizes the honorable member for St. Barnabas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is my distinct honor to stand here this morning and with you and the other members of this honorable house to welcome the students, principal, parents, staff of the Eva Hilton Primary School. As you would have stated, Mr. Speaker, the Eva Hilton School, Eva Hilton Primary School is located in the St. Barnabas constituency with another institution of learning, the University of the Bahamas, T.A. Thompson and C.C. Sweeting. But it is a pleasure this morning to welcome the Primary School Student of the Year in Remington Menace. We salute him for his excellence and his commitment to academic excellence and self-development. We salute Eva Hilton for the tremendous job, Mr. Speaker, the tremendous job that the principal, Mr. Butler, and the staff and the parents. We know that success is never a singular effort, and so while we do salute and promote Remington, we also salute and promote the efforts of the teachers and staff at the Eva Hilton School. We are so excited about what's happening. It's a model school in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and we are so pleased through the leadership of the member for South Beach, the Minister of Education, that Eva Hilton is expanding. They're going to be getting more resources. They're going to be getting a computer lab and other things to help them continue to build the school and the legacy of excellence that they would have had over the many decades. So again, it is my pleasure, Mr. Speaker, to welcome the stellar group of Bahamians. It is persons like these persons here, and of course, Remington and these students that make the Bahamas what it is today. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member. The chair recognizes the honorable member for South Beach.
Mr. Speaker, it's my honor and privilege to stand before this honorable house this morning. You know, Mr. Speaker, I stand here, of course, through the graces and generosity and confidence of the people of South Beach. And I, of course, am here as also the Minister of Responsibility for Education. And in that respect, sir, you know, the representations of the vicissitudes of our lives takes us from one extreme to the next. You would know, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure the Bahamian people would know that our system, our country, has experienced in the day or so of the untimely, tragic ending of the life of one Cameron Cooper, who was a student at Columbus Primary and a resident of Wilson Tract. I had the occasion this morning to visit with the school and the class at Columbus Primary. and to visit with Mrs. Patricia Larimore Chisholm, principal there, and their team of executives, administrators, support staff, and teachers. A school that unfortunately at this moment, Mr. Speaker and members, are in the throes of grief. Of course, I spent some time just sharing with the young people in that classroom, second grade. They are alive. They are filled with the grace of life, as Jesus would call us in John 10:10. Live it abundantly. But there is a reality, Mr. Speaker, that was disturbing in my engagement and exchange with them. Eventually, I prayed and invoked the grace of the Holy Spirit over their lives. But I asked them, how many of you 6-year-olds would have seen a gun? Every hand was raised. I said, how many of you in your neighborhood would have heard what you would think of as gunshots? Every hand was raised. Now, Mr. Speaker, let me take you back to my childhood at 6 years of age. Would not be able to identify a gun, would probably have never heard a gunshot. But in that classroom, approximately 24 students, every hand was raised. It's the circumstance, it's the unpalatable reality of the socio-psychological state of our Bahamian society. So our prayers and sympathies to his family and to the students and the staff, administrators of Columbus Primary. On the other extreme, Mr. Speaker, this morning, we are proud to recognize and acknowledge and endorse the greatness, the splendor, the magnificence, the excellence of Remington, of Eva Hilton. Many of you would not know Eva Hilton as being Oaks Field Primary, an institution of stellar and near unequaled academic proficiency. And see, what is important about this experience, Mr. Speaker, is that Remington had to beat out dozens of finalists from across the country, dozens of finalists, all of whom themselves were purveyors of academic and social and student excellence. This is what is so magnanimous about this achievement for this young man, his mother, Mrs. Rochelle, and Father Lyndon Minnis. So on the one hand, there is grief. On the other hand, in the mixture of life, there is joy. Let me say, Mr. Speaker, as the Minister of Education, member of South Beach, I am proud of the young people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas.
Introduction and swearing in of new members. Laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
There are none, Mr. Speaker.
Statements and communications by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Kalani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to give a brief communication with respect to the Labor Day tragedy. However, before I start, Mr. Speaker, I would like, as you have rightfully done, to recognize His Excellency Maurice Moore and his lovely wife, Sandra, who's visiting with us. As you know, Maurice is one of the founding fathers of the FNM, and he was also minister in the FNM government. I also, Mr. Speaker, want to recognize the primary students, especially the primary student of the year, young Minnis. Now, there may be a distinct difference, but we family. And I've asked young Minnis, Mr. Speaker, what he wanted to be after he's grown up. And he said he wanted to be an engineer.
Good. Yes.
But, Mr. Speaker, insisted, you said, you sure you don't want to be a politician following my footsteps? And he said, I've taken too many blows. But I have to remind him, Mr. Speaker, that sometimes it's good in the arena to fight like Muhammad Ali against George Foreman, where Ali took pure blows for 11 rounds. And the one blow came in the 12th, knock him out. But, Mr. Speaker, for the record of the House of Assembly, I wish to restate a number of things I noted over the weekend in the aftermath of the tragedy that occurred during the annual Labor Day March. The tragedy left 4 Bahamians dead and approximately 24 people injured. We mourn the deaths of Tabitha Charlene Hay, Catherine Augusta Fernanda, Tammy Patrice Gibson, and Diane Elizabeth Gray Ferguson. I again offer condolences on behalf of the people of the government of the Bahamas, and on my own behalf and that of my wife Patricia, to the families, colleagues, and friends of those who lost their lives last Friday. Along with the Minister of Health and Labor and the President of the Christian Council, I visited families of the deceased on Saturday past. I assured the families of our support during the many difficult days ahead. We also visited the injured who remained in hospital. Our prayers and thoughts, Mr. Speaker, are with the deceased and all of those who sustained injuries. The wounds of the injured are physical, psychological, emotional, and spiritual, which will require various forms of healing and support. I also advised 2 individuals, remain in Doctors Hospital, and 1 individual remains hospitalized at Princess Margaret Hospital. As I said in my national address, I heard many wonderful stories about the deceased, who each, in their own way, contributed to our country, including as professionals in the banking industry. I wish to reassure the public that the Royal Bahamas Police Force and other relevant authorities are investigating the matter. The various authorities will report their findings and what subsequent actions may be taken in the wake of this tragedy. I caution the public, I repeat, I caution the public not to engage in idle speculation and rumors about the tragedy. In investigating and reviewing this matter, we must be guided by the rule of law and fairness. Mr. Speaker, I know that the House will join me in thanking the march participants, first responders, onlookers, and the professional teams at the Princess Margaret Hospital and Doctors Hospital, who worked with great compassion and urgency to care for the deceased and the injured. We commend all those who came to the aid of those affected by this tragedy. I again, Mr. Speaker, thank the various government ministers and officials who quickly responded in the wake of the tragedy. We will continue to offer support and care to those in need of assistance. We are committed to doing all that we can to assist the family members of the deceased and those injured and their families. As our union leaders and workers demonstrated during the march, we are one people, united in love. We remain united in this time of tragedy and suffering. May God bring consolation to the bereaved at this time, and may He continue to bless our Bahamas. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Order that the communication be brought up. Order that the communication do lie on the table. Further statements and communication by ministers. Chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo.
There are none, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member. Communications by the clerk.
None, Mr. Speaker.
Messages from the Governor General. Messages from the Senate. Motions for leave of absence, leave to resign seat, and new writs. Presentation of petitions. Presentations of reports of committees. Adoption of reports of committees. First reading of bills. Second reading and committal of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker, colleagues. It is my pleasure to join in with the rest of my colleagues in congratulating the Primary School Student of the Year and the other honorees this morning from Eva Hilton. We certainly want to encourage you to continue to do well. As I said to Mr. Minnis, he descends from Long Island. Naturally. Naturally. And, you know, he should know that when he won, that the Long Island chat group lit up with pride. So you have some fans out there that you do not even know about yet. And we want to let you know that we continue to support you, to encourage you, and we're very proud of you. We certainly hope that you will continue to take this discipline and education, seriousness, on into high school as you move on. So congratulations to you. And the last point I'll make is, you know, the Prime Minister mentions that he's a menace. And I've said to the Prime Minister before that I also have menace in my family. Absolutely. From South End.
Yeah, good.
So we all is one. But Mr. Speaker, I also want to share in the condolences to the families of those in the from the Financial Services Union that met their demise on Labor Day. A very tragic event, and I can tell you, as I spoke to the workers in Freeport at the time of that event, that we were all shocked and certainly saddened by that event. A day of celebration, a day of honoring those who sacrificed so much for our country. That would happen on such a day was certainly heavy for us, and we certainly lift up the families in prayer as they go through their difficult period. Mr. Speaker, today is D-Day, the day when Americans remember the sacrifice and heroic events that marked a significant turning point in World War II. As I read the papers today, though not as dramatic, today seems like D-Day for the Bahamas. As we begin this debate to bring real relief to the masses of Bahamians, give them real hope for a better future, a better life for their children, and a financially sound country. Mr. Speaker, I wish to thank the literally hundreds of ordinary citizens, Bahamians, who have called, text, and emailed to encourage, to offer advice, support, and prayers. Leadership is a lonely business, Mr. Speaker, and change is hard. Sometimes those who say they are with you are only with you behind closed doors.
Yes.
But change must come, and God uses his people for his purpose and raises up those he feels strong enough to carry the load. That load, Mr. Speaker, has fallen on this F&M government, and we accept the challenge. Issues of generational inequality, political tribalism, in the everyday affairs of this country. Racism, classism, all must come to an end. And so that our people may be informed and make wise choices. Mr. Speaker, I mentioned that I spoke at the Labor Day rally march in Grand Bahama last week. And it's unfortunate that though the unions continuously say this is not a political day, this is a day for the celebration of workers, we still have the unfortunate issue where political parties decide that they want to come in their political colors, flying their political flags, to dominate those marches and those events. And Mr. Speaker, on a day when unions are calling for unity, what these political parties are promoting is separation, tribalism. It's that politics is involved in every aspect of our lives, not even that we can celebrate each other without putting some color on it. And Mr. Speaker, it's sad because there's a meme or a story going around that the crowd walked out on me when I was speaking or when I got up to speak. And Mr. Speaker, it's true to some extent. It's because the half the crowd, I would venture to say 50% of the crowd was dressed in their political colors. And as I got up to speak, they did in fact leave. And what I found unfortunate about that is not that they didn't stop to listen to me, but they had an opportunity to hear from the government what were the plans going forward, what's entailed in this budget, and what's in it for them, the workers. When you decide to deliberately deny your people, your members, an opportunity to be informed, you're doing them a disservice. Don't say that you have to agree with me. You don't have to agree with me. But there's nothing wrong with hearing so that you can make informed, educated decisions. Yeah. So I cry shame on them. And as much as they think that the meme means something to me, it doesn't mean anything to me personally. But I do regret that those residents, those citizens who could best benefit from the provisions contained in this budget were not given the opportunity to hear what's for them. I cry shame. So make jokes. You walked out on me. Well, a bunch of PLPs walking out on me ain't nothing new. But I regret that they, unfortunately, were not able to benefit from the information. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the good people of East Grand Bahama who continue to support and pray for me in admittedly less than ideal circumstances. We all know the struggle is real in Grand Bahama. And they know that I am for them. And we will continue to work together to improve the situation in Grand Bahama as quickly as we can possibly do that. Mr. Speaker, I want to also recognize the presence of the Honorable Ambassador Maurice Elijah Moore, and more particularly his beautiful wife Sandra, who we in Grand Bahama, and I dare say in the Bahamas, but particularly in East Grand Bahama, we love and admire. See, he was the first representative from our party, firstborn, and he represented East Grand Bahama. So we own him, and we honor him, and we're trying to do some things. And hopefully we get some cooperation with some things. Because he is worthy of that kind of honor and respect. And of course, his wife, Sandra, you couldn't find a more beautiful Christian soul. And of course, I dare say, if it wasn't for her, there would be no him. Mr. Speaker, 1 week ago today, I presented the government's budget communication for the 2018-19 fiscal year. I stated at that time that this is no ordinary budget. And I'm stating it again for emphasis, because this budget does not follow the practice and traditions of the past. It represents a clear break with the past, not for the mere sake of change, but to transform the way government operates and the way it delivers results for the Bahamian people. Gone are the days of unrealistic expectations, broken promises, and blatant fiscal mismanagement. In this budget, we are giving Bahamians the unfiltered truth about the state of public finances. And some people don't like the truth. They want you to lie to them.
And Jesus says it sets you free.
It might not be what any of us want to hear, but it is the reality. And we are addressing these matters with a level of transparency and fiscal responsibility that no other government has done before. Many of the initiatives intended to drive our economic vision, our agenda for inclusive growth, social progress, environmental sustainability, public sector reform, and fiscal redress, have been understandably lost in the fear and the frustration over the value-added tax increase. While I will speak more to these frustrations, I also plan to reinforce the message that in this budget, the government has allocated public resources in alignment with its priorities and promises. We're not only using the people's money to stabilize the government's fiscal position, we are also investing strategically in targeted programs to advance an economic vision. You may have heard this saying before, don't tell me where your priorities are, show me where you spend your money, and I will see where your priorities are. I will proudly subject the people's budget to that test, because we are spending the people's hard-earned money contributed to taxes on a vision of inclusiveness, social progress, modernization, generational equality, and fiscal responsibility. You will see that our budget invests in neglected communities and vulnerable populations so that they might feel the benefits of inclusive growth. Improves the competitiveness of the Bahamian workforce so Bahamians have better opportunities for work. Fosters a culture of entrepreneurship and innovation with direct investments and development support for micro, small, and medium-sized businesses so Bahamians can better create their own jobs. Demonstrates leadership in adopting green technology, empowering Bahamians to do the same. Invest in digital technology to enhance the digital infrastructure of the public service and to modernize schools and bring them into the digital future. For emphasis, I want to highlight a few of the government's initiatives. The government's $5 million investment in the Over the Hill Community Development Partnership is only one example of our promise to prioritize the most vulnerable people and neglected communities. While we have spoken about it before, it is well worth remembering this represents the single largest investment in a holistic economic development and community rejuvenation exercise over the Hill, and I dare say, ever. This is a break from the past. We all know that these historic foundational communities have been represented by prime ministers, ministers of finance, and other cabinet ministers for decades. And yet, it was left to this government to demonstrate its commitment by budgeting according to its priorities. During the debate, we will also speak about infrastructure development in the Family Islands, about tax relief measures on basic goods and services for the poorer among us, about tax relief measures and new programs
targeted at the neglected arts and culture community, and other initiatives that will advance government's vision for inclusiveness. Even though fears exist about the dampening effect of value-added tax, the fact still remains we are taking deliberate action to directly impact individuals and communities who have been forgotten and underserved for too long. And Mr. Speaker, I just want to divert right there, just to read something so we bring context. And this is from the Tribune, February 11, 2013, from the Minister of State. Michael Halkitis, Minister of State. And he was speaking to the Chamber of Commerce, and he said, it is recommended that a value-added tax is introduced at July 1, 2014 at a rate of 15%, consistent with VAT rates generally charged elsewhere. Now listen to this. Such a VAT rate, in combination with other reform proposals, will ensure that government will have access to adequate resources, revenue streams for the future. Yeah, it's an old story, but I bring it because it's important for you to understand where I'm going. Okay? Okay? Now, I want to go on, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member.
I want to read another article. Yeah, I want to read another article, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member. And since that is a newspaper article, are you adopting?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. And I'll lay it if you wish.
Thank you.
You didn't bring in 15.
So, Mr. Speaker, but I want to go to this other one because I heard, and I read somewhere in either yesterday's paper or today's paper, I can't remember now, a statement from a former Minister of State for Finance, Mr. James Smith, who was pontificating about what this VAT increase, this rate, is going to cause the Bahamian economy. And I want to read this. And this is like I said, the Nassau Guardian, February 15, 2013. He says, the article is by Sieska Adderley, and I'm going to read it, and you'll get the quote from him directly. The proposed VAT will essentially be a sales tax that applies on goods and services, according to a former cabinet minister. James Smith, former state minister for finance, told Guardian Business that a new tax system, including the proposed VAT, would seek to broaden the revenue base and lower the tax rate, which would be much more equitable for the Bahamas. The proposal would be for a VAT at about 15%. But simultaneously with that, you roll back the customs duties, which average around 40 to 50%. And at the end of the day, the public will be no worse off, in a sense. That sound familiar?
Sounds very familiar.
Yeah? So you see, Mr. Speaker, I just read those because I want to give context. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to read them, right? Because it gives context.
Honorable members.
Yeah. Listen, man. You know, I wanted to read them, Mr. Speaker, for context, right? Because
honorable members, honorable members. Honorable members, the member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker.
Has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I read that.
Just a moment, honorable member. Honorable members, the member for East Grand Bahama has the floor. We are not going to be tolerating interruptions and shouting across the floor. Of course, we want to have a lively debate. We expect the debate to get contentious at times, but we want to have order in this place, and I can assure you that we're going to get order. All members will become familiar with Rule 88. Honorable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I read those for the purpose of setting the frame, putting in context and setting the framework against what it is that we were working with. All right, because there's another statement that was made by the current member for Cat Island, Runke, and San Salvador when he was asked yesterday by the news media about what his thought was about this increase in value-added tax. And they asked him a blunt question.
And he answered it in a way that he thought that he was waffling, being coy. But the reality is, Mr. Speaker, when you meet a situation as a responsible person, you have to answer it.
Honorable Member for Cat Island, Rumkins, and Salvador. You on a point of order?
Is the member suggesting I was being coy or waffling, or is that his view of what my response? No, he said that's what he said I did. I just want to know what he said. But let him say that. Don't say that's what I was doing. Yeah, let him say that.
That's his interpretation.
But let him say it.
You were being coy. You were being
Mr. Speaker,
funny.
Mr. Speaker, again, we should really respect the chair. But Mr. Speaker, again, I said that in the context of setting the stage so people can understand why 12% is so relevant today and why it is an appropriate rate, Mr. Speaker. Because when I go through some more, you will see, when I talk about the debt, the liabilities that the former administration heaped on the Bahamian people in 5 years, you will understand, everybody ought to understand, why we had to increase this rate to 12%.
Like the young people say, that's real talk.
It's real talk, Mr. Speaker, real talk. And they wanted to raise it to 15%, and we weren't near this position where we are today. They wanted to raise it to 15%.
Join the line.
Okay? So, you know, hypocrites need not apply. Okay? Mr. Speaker.
Make your notes, man, so when you're ready to talk.
Mr. Speaker, in light of the fiscal measures which call for a shared sacrifice from us all, we are taking deliberate steps to cushion the impact on the poorest households. The 7.5% cost savings on breadbasket items will directly impact the most vulnerable Bahamians in a tangible way, Mr. Speaker. These families with VAT being zero rated on the breadbasket items will receive 7.5% back in their pockets, Mr. Speaker. All right? Yeah, and that's, I'm going to get into the conversation a little bit later about this zero-rated versus
Honorable Member.
You see, because at the end of the day, at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, to the average Bahamian that we are talking about, that we are trying to assist, they can care less whether it's zero-rated, exempt, or taken off. All they know is they ain't got to pay it. That's what it's about. The technical discussions we will have. Right? But the fact of the matter is, the merchants will know, and they do know. Right? But it will be. Yeah, let me start. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, there's been a lot of sarcasm around the bread basket with the inclusion of items like corned beef. This is somewhat understandable in the context of our healthy lifestyle push. But this exercise is not about corned beef. The bread basket contains substantive items that many Bahamians want to consume and are financially constrained to consume. So let us not scorn these Bahamians whose lifestyles are based on the bread basket. I can say today that tuna will be added to the bread basket. Sardines and mackerel already in the bread basket. So they will be zero rated, Mr. Speaker. This government did not invent or create the long-standing bread basket list. Rice, soup, cheese, evaporated milk, and yes, corned beef and tuna and mackerel and sardine are the basics that Bahamians, particularly poor families, rely on for their survival. And the 7.5% savings that we are implementing by removing VAT from the bread basket, as promised in our manifesto, will make a difference. Just think of the relief for a family when it comes to the cost of buying baby food. These targeted measures will make a difference for those families trying to sustain themselves with the basics. Importantly, the Consumer Protection Commission and the Price Control Commission have an important role to play
in ensuring that the various tax exemptions are passed on to the consumers, particularly with these price-controlled items. And we encourage the Bahamian people to be vigilant, to be ghost shoppers, reporters. And where you see prices in the store have not come down, or that the items are being unfairly priced, to report it to the Price Commission or the Consumer Protection Commission, because they are there to protect you. And we want to make sure that we are not enriching business people in this particular circumstance, but that we are putting money back into the hands, the pockets of the ordinary Bahamian people as is intended. For some Bahamians, I can appreciate that these savings might seem meager and unimportant, but this government is committed to prioritizing the vulnerable and the neglected. Yes, we will reshape the breadbasket over time in concert with a public education exercise, but our immediate actions are designed to provide some cushion as the country goes through this period of shared sacrifice. We will not continue the past practice of neglect, and we will not allow vulnerable Bahamians to be left behind or ran over by the substantive changes that are now taking place. The same principle applies with the VAT savings on utilities. Later, I will speak about some adjustments we have made to the threshold on electricity and water bills in order to cover even more Bahamians. But for now, I will emphasize that our revenue measures, specifically those bringing tax relief, were strategically targeted to provide a cushion and to provide incentive to take small yet progressive steps forward on a range of other priorities under our economic vision. As I said, Mr. Speaker, this budget is different, and we are breaking from the past. In this budget, we are also investing in social progress with an emphasis on empowering the Bahamian labor force and promoting entrepreneurship. Here again, we are breaking from the past. Social progress goes hand in hand with increased economic freedom. And this requires that Bahamians have more opportunities to create their own jobs and to be more competitive in the private sector. Although the government is the primary employer today, we are laying the groundwork to flip this situation around. In a healthy, vibrant economy, it is the private sector, entrepreneurs, small businesses, and mature industries that drive innovation and job creation. So we've included in this budget $2.6 million worth of investments in scholarships at BTVI, so that the cost of skills training and certification is not a barrier for Bahamians seeking to increase their competitiveness. We have included in the budget $5 million to launch a small business development initiative that will support small and medium-sized businesses, providing them with the incentives and assistance needed to survive and thrive. Under this program, Bahamian entrepreneurs will have access to direct financing. We will also provide support for market research and financial management and other business support. And in addition to that, Mr. Speaker, in our procurement legislation that we hope to bring to Parliament soon, we are setting aside a certain percentage of government procurement for goods and services reserved for small businesses. Again, putting our money where our mouth is and supporting the development and success of small and medium-sized enterprises. So in case the side opposite missed it, we are providing training for our people, particularly those who cannot afford to go off for education or have some family or some scholarship. We are providing an opportunity for them to learn a skill so that they can feed themselves, that they can empower themselves. And particularly our young men, we know what happens to them when they can't
meet their basic needs. They can't take care of their family. We know what happens to them. The lack of the lack of self-esteem that is caused by feeling less than a man. The Minister for National Security will tell you, when you see that kind of a broken person, they're vulnerable to all kinds of things. This program will give them an opportunity to empower themselves, to feel good about themselves, which will transfer to their children and to their relationships with their wives and their neighbors and their families, and to the community as a whole. Because somebody who feels self-empowered, who feels a sense of self-esteem, is much less likely to get involved in destructive behavior. But not only are we giving them the skills, Mr. Speaker, we're going further. And we're providing them with the mentorship, the support, the market research, to be able to flesh out their ideas, to help them to navigate the maze of the regulatory process, and mentor them through their startup. And once we've done that, Mr. Speaker, we're providing them with capital, real money, to buy their tools, to secure their premises, taking them from hopeless to hopeful about the future of themselves, their families, and this country. In other words, Mr. Speaker, the government is investing the people's money to foster a culture of entrepreneurship and innovation, and to increase the competitiveness of the Bahamian labor force. We want Bahamians to have access to more fulfilling jobs, better paying jobs, and opportunities that will create social progress. To tie it all together, this budget is a transformational budget because it establishes a new era of fiscal responsibility. We are drawing a line under the mountain of payment arrears and unpaid bills left to accumulate shamelessly by previous administrations. We are implementing proper and right budgeting for all known spending commitments so that no further arrears build up in the future. We are implementing the spending reforms, tax administration reforms, and fiscal administration reforms that have long been needed in this country and that are vitally required to restore the public's finances to a healthy state on a durable and sustainable basis. With this budget, we are implementing a 3-year fiscal plan, judiciously crafted to fix the tragic fiscal mess left behind by the previous administration, to finally eliminate the public finance deficit, and to begin to reduce the onerous burden of government debt. I will have more to say about these fiscal matters today. Mr. Speaker, in this contribution to open the debate on the 2018-19 budget, I will indeed cover all of these areas of the budget. In so doing, I aim to stimulate a vigorous debate on these matters over the next weeks that I am confident will very clearly demonstrate to our fellow citizens that our government, unlike the predecessor, that we get it. We are here to serve the people, not serve ourselves at the expense of the people. Ours is the people's budget. And this people's budget has their welfare and future prosperity at heart. In starting this debate, I would be remiss if I failed to note and comment on the observations offered by the leader of the opposition. Most recently, just last night, when he was unable to commit to reverse the increase in tax. The PLP wrecked the fiscal house of the Bahamas. Wow. They know this, and the numbers are very, very clear. But the member for Cat Island and Rum Cay in San Salvador knows that he cannot and will not be able to reduce the value-added tax because he knows the fiscal situation that he and his government created. He knows that we are doing the right thing and the proper thing by addressing this issue, by setting up the country for future prosperity.
Chair recognizes the honorable member for Cat Island, Rumpkin, San Salvador. On a point of order.
The member is mischaracterizing what I said. Hear what I said. What I said to the question was, it depends on when I'm in power, when I'm elected. That's when, right? And that depends. And if it occurs shortly, yes, I will reverse it. But if 4 years out, I have to understand the state of the economy and how they would have left it. How, of course, my projection is, my projection is that tax is going to be disastrous for the economy. And I don't know what state they will be leaving the economy when I'm there.
I'm sure he will remind you the state you left it in now.
Well, yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, because he gave me an opening.
Yeah.
He gave me an opening, Mr. Speaker. And I'm going to come to that in 2 minutes. I'm not even going to get ahead of myself.
Well, you can scratch your head.
But I can tell you about what you left this country, what you left for us to deal with. And again, why we have no choice in doing what we're doing. You see? Because we shouldn't be duplicitous.
It might not have happened in the cabinet
right?
when he was.
Because, as I said to somebody, the view is always different depending on where you stand.
They never used to give him all the information.
No.
I don't think you were cabinet when that happened for you.
I see one of the pundits in one of the newspapers, and they've been consistently on this, trying to cast this aspersion, if you will, on the leader, the Prime Minister, member for Kalani, and on myself, about the position that we took in 2014. And they tried to make this case that you said this in 2014, so you must stick with it. Regardless of what happens, you must stick with it.
Things change. I used to be.
And so I'm very happy to hear
What he just said?
the member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador say in this place today that your position that you may have taken back then, based upon the facts that you had back then, and the circumstances that existed back then,
Will change.
that it necessarily has to be adjusted.
Must change.
Based upon what you find.
Only a fool sticks to his original position in the face of new evidence.
There's no need for explanation.
Honorable member, the chair recognizes.
What I said.
The chair recognizes. Honorable member. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Cat Island, Rumpkin, San Salvador.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What I am saying is I'm demonstrating responsible opposition. Unlike them, who was very irresponsible in their demonstrations to what we're going to do. What I said, Mr. Speaker, is that I don't know, when I assume office, I don't know how they're going to leave it. I suspect it's going to be in, well, they left it in a wheelchair. He left it in a wheelchair. I might meet it again in intensive care. Then I have to decide what we do then.
Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister reminds me that when he was born, he was 10 pounds. Look at him today. Things change. But Mr. Speaker, there's no point in trying to defend the indefensible. And there's nothing shameful about changing your position based upon the facts as they change. There's nothing shameful about that.
God changes.
I mean, who among us has not had a change in a position once we find out some circumstances? Which of us? I mean, every time you wake up in the morning, you put on a suit. Well, I can tell you, I did it this morning. Put on my suit and they decided what tie I was going to wear. I had on a tie. It was a different one. But I decided I'd change it because of the color of my suit. Depends on the circumstances. Right? And we took a principled position. Right? Because the fact of the matter is, if you were to look, and again, I'm going to get ahead of myself, so forgive me if I repeat this. When you look at where the country was in 2014, coming out of a recession, where the previous government had
to institute certain counter-cyclical spending measures because the economy was losing jobs at an alarming rate. And so they spent money. Coming out of that in 2010, 2011, 2012, instead of the previous government rationalizing the government and bringing it back down to normal sizes, they kept it and spent more, despite collecting almost $1 billion in value-added tax. So, you know, you want to talk about why we change our position? We're looking at $7 billion of debt.
40%.
We're looking at upwards of $600 million of deficit based upon bills that they created. And Mr. Speaker, what is shameful about that is even as we try to adjust, as we try to do the things that will help us to pare back this $266 million increase in the payroll. And if anybody who ever run a business, you know that payroll is only one part of it. Because those same people, they utilize services, they utilize supplies, they do all the rest of it. So you added the math, Mr. Speaker. We're trying to roll that back, and they're telling us about we firing people. Never mind that these people only had 3-month and 6-month contract anyway. Didn't have any security in the system. Never mind that. Never mind that. Okay? They're playing games with the Bahamian people. Just like they're playing games today, trying to be cute about this VAT, this increase in VAT. Oh, I won't reduce it. I don't think I can reduce it. I don't know. We'll see what the circumstances is. Playing cute. Knowing what they have done. Knowing their part in this run-up. And knowing what needs to be done. Mr. Speaker, it's wrong. It's wrong. It's wrong, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, if the leader of the opposition and the deputy leader of the opposition, if they thought that the move we are making is wrong, then they should be brave enough to say to the Bahamian people and commit it today that they're going to bring the value-added tax back to 7.5%. Say it today. Put it on the record.
Stand up and say it.
Right? Put it on the record.
Say it.
The chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Cat Island, Rum, San Salvador.
What Brave says is that there's no need for a raise of any taxes in this budget or any budget in the near future. Because, one,
Honourable Member, you on a point of order, right?
No, Mr. Speaker. He invited me to speak.
Honourable Member.
Mr. Speaker, he invited me to speak.
Honourable Member.
He invited me to respond.
No, you respond.
He called on me.
However, Honourable Member, on a point of order, you can make your point of order.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
You can make your point of order. However, the references that are being made were not spoken to in this chamber.
Which references, Mr. Speaker?
With respect to your press statements.
What press?
You are attempting to give an explanation of your press statement.
No, Mr. Speaker, he asked whether I will commit. He's asking me to commit to repeal the 12%. My response is that if we're in office next year, yes, we will. My further response is that in the event that there's no need for the increase, and I'll explain to him why there's no need. There's no need, right?
Honourable Member.
There's no need for it.
Honourable Member for East Grand Bahama. Honourable members, we understand the nature of this debate, and we understand that it will be contentious. However, we cannot proceed in the hypothetical. Honourable members. I am not speaking specifically to you or to the opposition. I'm speaking to everyone. I'm indicating that we would not proceed in this debate in dealing with hypotheticals. Honorable member for Mangrove Key. When
The chest is just a shadow minister. He was in there.
let me make something clear. Let me make something clear.
Talking who was there.
Honorable members. Honorable members. The speaker mic is on at all times for a purpose. When the speaker begins to speak, when the chair intervenes, all members should be seated and remain quiet. And when the chair is addressing a particular matter, it is not proper for members, whether it be on the government side or on the opposition side, to be shouting comments at the chair. That is not going to be tolerated. I'm putting you on notice so no one can be surprised or accuse the chair of ambushing anyone when the chair makes a decision. The chair will not tolerate the shouting of remarks, particularly at the chair, while this debate is going on. Honorable member. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure with all that noise what happened, but I think I heard that the member says that he will repeal it.
He rolled it
He
back.
rolled it back.
That's what I heard.
Mr. Speaker, again, you know, anyway, I'll leave it. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, at the very least, we can say that in his statement, the opposition leader recognizes and admits that we are doing the right thing. Mr. Speaker, but I can assure him and the Bahamian people that we in the FNM will never do the country what they did to the country. Whomever the good people of the Bahamas elect as their next administration will find a fiscal house that is fully in order. They will find no runaway spending and no runaway deficits. They will be in a position to meet the government's commitments in an orderly and timely way. And they will be subject to the constraints of fiscal responsibility legislation that requires them to have a long-term plan and not run up spending for self-serving political ends like we saw in the 2016-17 run-up. Before last night's
honorable member for East Grand Bahama. The member for Cat Island, you're on a point of order, honorable member.
I'm not going to let him get away. The member said that they met a runaway deficit. That is untrue. And the stats speaks to it. That's why I brought it with me this morning. But I know they're going to run down this track. The deficit at the end of 2016 was the lowest it was trending right down. It was trended from we came into office, from 2013, the deficit was trending downward. And despite the two hurricanes, right? Despite the two hurricanes, it was still the lowest it had been in years in 2016.
You know, Mr. Speaker, again, I thank the member because the more he speaks, the more he gives me fuel, energy to make this case. Mr. Speaker, you see, well, anyway, again. But Mr. Speaker, it gives me no pleasure to talk about the PLP's budget track record. And we can talk about this now that you're talking about these deficits you're talking about. It gives me no pleasure to talk about the PLP's budgeted track record, given how dismal it is. But the facts of their false pretense, false recasting of the past, and fabrication of facts, it is simply unavoidable. Mr. Speaker, I begin with their budget track record in respect of their forecast for economic growth and the fiscal year GFS deficit. I can answer you now.
You caused this.
For 2013, they projected real growth of 2.7%. The facts?
Negative.
The economy actually shrank by 0.4%. For 2014, they again forecasted positive real growth of the economy at a rate of 2.3%. The facts? Real growth was again negative by a negative 1.1%. The same trend maintained with their deficits. In 2013-14, listen up, I can give it to you. In 2013-14 budget, they forecasted a deficit of $443 million. Guess what? 2013-14. They overshot the deficit by $45 million for an actual outturn of $488 million. In the 2014-15 budget, they forecasted a deficit of $286 million. This is the trend that he's talking about now. He's saying he's going this way. Again, they overshot the deficit by $95 million at $381 million. Mr. Speaker, this is a picture of a government that was clueless, in my opinion, about planning, and reckless with their spending. And the horror story continues. In the 2015-16 budget, they again projected real growth of 2.3% and a deficit of $141 million. See, according to their math, the deficit going down. The facts?
Let's go to the central bank.
Real growth underperformed yet again by 1%, and they overshot the deficit by $169 million. They actually overshot the budget by more than they had actually, more than 100%.
Voodoo economics.
More than 100%. But he wants to tell me the deficit is going down. Mr. Speaker, at $310 million, the deficit was actually more than twice the level projected. And finally, the proverbial coup de grace. We come to the 2016-17 budget that I suspect will live in infamy in the annals of this country. That year, the Minister of Finance presented a budget that called for real growth of 0.5%, seemingly more realistic this time, and a deficit of $100 million. Hallelujah. We're getting this deficit under control. But what's the facts? What's the cold, hard facts? The Bahamian economy actually shrank again in 2016 to the tune of 1.7%. You lost. The economy slid again, 1.7%. And the deficit, I can give you the dollar figure, and the deficit, bolstered by hundreds of millions of dollars in questionable, let me use that word, pre-election spending, ballooned to $661 million. They projected that the deficit was going to be $100 million. There's no point of order here. There's no point of order.
Honorable member.
Projected.
Honorable member, the members on the point of order. The chair recognizes the member for Exuma and Ragged Island.
Mr. Speaker, I'm trying to belabor the minister as I anticipate being given the same courtesies later on today.
Honorable member. Honorable member.
But he is.
Honorable member. You are on a point of order.
Get to my point now, Mr. Speaker. Get to my point.
Get to your point. Don't make
I'm getting to
innuendos about the chair.
No, Mr. Speaker, I wasn't speaking about you, Mr. Speaker. I believe you misunderstood. All right? And I regret if you believe I was making reference to the chair, Mr. Speaker. I was speaking in reference to East Grand Bahama. And I want to make the point that whilst the minister's statistics is accurate, he is being misleading. He is misleading.
Honorable member.
He's misleading, Mr. Speaker.
State specifically, honorable member.
He is misleading because the leader of the opposition indicated that deficits were declining, and the truth of the matter is, in 2014, in 2015, and 2016, the actual deficits did in fact decline. So when the minister chooses to use statistics, I would prefer, this House would prefer, the Bahamian people would prefer, that he do not do so selectively and that he tells the truth and the whole truth.
Again, you know, obviously the member for Exuma didn't listen carefully. But I'm just going to give him two numbers. All right? I'm not going to go through the whole list again. I'm just going to give him two numbers. In 2013, they projected 2.7% growth. The facts is that the economy shrank by 0.4%.
That's the truth.
Mr. Speaker.
That's the truth.
For the year, yeah, I'm going to tell you now. Relax, relax. I can give it to you now.
That was the truth.
The deficit was projected to be $443 million.
Yes.
They overshot it
Yes.
by $45 million
Yes.
for an actual outturn of $488 million.
That's the fact.
That's 2012-13.
So they borrowed 488.
Now we come down to 2017.
Facts.
They projected $100 million. $100 million. Where did it come in? $661 million. Now I don't know what graph that is you're looking at. But that graph go like that. That graph don't go like that. Yeah?
From 488.
No, my numbers? This is the numbers from the accounts.
I can tell you what.
My numbers? Oh, really? You know, let me tell you. Yeah. So, but don't pretend and don't try to mislead the Bahamian people. Okay? Don't mislead the Bahamian people.
I hope he don't run his business that way.
Yeah, I'm sure he doesn't.
Okay.
Don't mislead the Bahamian people. All right? These are facts, are immutable facts. We don't need to question them. All right? We can argue about theory and policy, but the numbers are the numbers. Right? That's why I like being an accountant. You can't fudge them numbers. 1 and 1 can equal 2. I don't know how you slice it, where you put it on the paper. It can still equal 2. Or in your case, it'll be 1 minus 1.
Equals 2.
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate that the economy and the public finances were affected adversely by Hurricane Matthew in 2016.
Honorable members.
However, a shameful multi-million-dollar spurt in spending in the months before the election and an almost 7-fold overshoot of the deficit are simply unjustifiable. I continue to say I wouldn't do it in my business. And I know the member for Exuma, Ragged Island, he wouldn't do it in his business. We'd be out of business.
Well, that's what the PLT was.
What about they're not out of business because what they do is they just tax, right? Or they run it off. Yeah, I did. Or they push it off and pretend, close their eyes like it didn't exist. What about their performance? I use a bad word. Sorry, you're right. You're right. Yeah, you're right. I take it back, Mr. Speaker. I withdraw. They don't tax except for 7.5%. But they borrow. That's what they do. They like to spend and borrow. That's what they want to do. But Mr. Speaker, what about their performance in respect of generating stronger growth of the economy? It could not have realistically been worse. According to the latest national accounts data from the Department of Statistics, you know, the one that they question all the time, the Bahamian economy posted no appreciable growth. That's not true. Go and check the newspapers. The Bahamian economy posted no appreciable growth whatsoever between 2012 and 2017. Let me restate that, Mr. Speaker. For it is important to grasp the full import of what the cold, hard data is telling us. Under their watch, our national economy
essentially stagnated at the same level of real activity for the full 5 years under their leadership. Every year, negative growth. Shrinking. But the spending, $2 billion, you know, they borrowed. I don't want people to get away from this. And I can say it again somewhere in here. But they borrowed $2 billion over their term.
Honorable member.
And that's,
the chair recognizes the honourable member for Angleston on a point of order.
Because I think
Are you on a point of order?
well, the member's referring to a report, I think. I'm not sure if it's the Department of Statistics or the Central Bank, but I'm wondering if he would lay those reports on the floor of on the table of the Parliament, so that we don't have everything is public domain. The newspapers is public domain. We're in Parliament. I'm asking you've been here a couple of months. You should know better than that. Speaker, I'm asking the member for East Grand Bahama to lay the reports that he's referring to on the table of this Parliament, so we can see the report in full. That's not a difficult thing.
Mr. Speaker, Honourable member. I will commit to laying that report. But you know, again, this again proves a point that I made when I first started speaking, and that is, information is available to those who are interested. Yeah? No, I wasn't speaking. I was not speaking to the member for Angleston.
What's the point of
Why the member for Angleston think I was speaking?
You on a point of order?
Mr. Speaker.
Yes. State the point.
Speaker, the member of East Grand Bahama is purporting to patronize me in terms of all you have to do is read it. It's a simple request, Mr. Speaker. It is a simple request. I'm asking the member. It's not complicated. It's not political. I'm asking the member, and he can do so after the luncheon break, at his convenience. I'm asking him to lay the reports on that he's referring to on the floor, on the table of the Parliament. He don't have to preach. He don't have to dictate. He don't have to teach. He don't have to be didactic. All he has to do is lay the report. We'll wait until after the luncheon hour if he doesn't have it readily available, Mr. Speaker. I'd be grateful if you do that. It's a simple request in parliamentary procedure.
Absolutely. So, Mr. Speaker, I don't know why the member thought I was talking to her. All I said was, and I made reference to an earlier comment that I made, that the information is available to those who are interested. I get you the report. That's not a problem. But I'm saying, I'm making the comment that information is available to the public for those who are interested. You know, the Department of Statistics is one of those agencies that people tend to forget about until you start quoting these kind of statistics. Then everybody gets up in arms and they want, oh, who is this black hole? Where is this Department of Statistics? Who are these people? What do they do? They must be working for the government, and so they're given the government's positions. And you know, Mr. Speaker, again, you know, I hear a comment from the seat, and I want the member. I want us. Let me not single out anybody. So again, information is available to all of us if we care to get the facts. And if they got the facts, they will know very clearly in a newspaper article, and I remember it clear, when the unemployment rate, I think it was, took a negative turn. And the member who is in this chamber today, in the newspaper said, something must be wrong with the Department of Statistics number. Research it. Research it. Research it. You know, there's only 4 members on that side. Research it. And I invite the press. Okay? So anyway, as I was saying, Mr. Speaker, in reviewing the track record of our predecessors, one and only one conclusion can be drawn. Either the governing party at the time was totally incompetent and just didn't know what it is they were doing, or more likely and more damning, it knew full well what it was doing and was manipulating the public finances as it saw fit, and certainly not, sadly to say, for the benefit
of hardworking Bahamians. So I guess when the leader of the opposition is saying
honorable member,
to undo,
honorable member, state the point of order, please. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Cat Island, Rumpke, and Sunshine.
Because others listen to us, not just our.
Is there a point of order?
What's the point of
supporters
order?
out
Yeah,
there.
the point of order. It depends on where
The
he
member
sits.
speaks about the manipulation of the public finances. How is the same persons who are advising, who they left in place in 2012, are the same persons who advise us throughout the 2000 to our 5 year in office, all right? And the point out, it is wrong for him to suggest that the public accounts was manipulated by a government. Are they now manipulating it? And the same person?
Mr. Speaker, again, it is regrettable that the member would seek to suggest that the public servants, the hard-working public servants at the Ministry of Finance and at the Treasury are somehow manipulating the numbers. I never said that. Mr. Speaker, that is unfortunate. That's unfortunate. And it's not the first time that the public service has been questioned in that regard. Yeah? Mr. Speaker.
Politicians.
Mr. Speaker.
Politicians. Because
Mr. Speaker.
didn't bring this budget.
So I guess when the leader of the opposition is saying that we are seeking to undo what they accomplished in a twisted way, they may actually be right. Because we don't want to be like them. We want to be decidedly different from them and deliver for the Bahamian people successful fiscal policies that leaves the country better off after this term and not demonstratively worse off. Yeah, that's the word. Worse off than when we met it. Mr. Speaker, why should anyone care about these facts? Can they simply be shrugged off or downplayed as the deputy leader of the opposition would seemingly want to have it? Be careful. The facts do matter, Mr. Speaker, because fiscal mismanagement on the scale practiced by the government between 2012 and 2017 produced an increase in the level of government debt that is unprecedented in our history. Unprecedented. During the 5-year period, the massive annual deficits had to be financed through borrowings, including borrowing to pay interest. That produced an increase in the government debt of over $2.6 billion added to the debt between 2012 and 2017. I know some of us don't want to accept that. But again, as I said, numbers are a funny thing. No matter what you do with them, you still got to add up. $2.6 billion. And I hear a member say, well, what is it now? What did you do in the last? We added $1.4 billion. You know why? Because we had to pay the bills that you didn't, not you, because you wasn't there. We had to pay the bills that the previous administration left behind. $1.4 billion. So in reality, it's not 2.6. It's actually $4 billion when you add the 1.4 we had to borrow in this last year.
Reckless.
That's on you all. That's on you all. And as such, the amount of debt outstanding mushroomed from $3.9 billion in June 2012 to over $6.5 billion in June 2017. The debt outstanding, the national debt, mushroomed from $3.9 billion in June 2012 to over $6.5 billion in June 2017.
Sure about that?
Are you sure about that?
Reality. Let me hear it again.
And they want to know why we got to increase taxes. They want me to go out and borrow another $607 million?
You mean all of the years before them was only
Huh?
3.9?
They want me to put more weight on the financial system, the economics of this country.
They're working for the IMF. They want the IMF.
They want the IMF to come.
They want the IMF.
Oh, I didn't understand.
Yeah.
I didn't understand.
They want the IMF to come.
But you know, Mr. Speaker, what is even more amazing? What is even more amazing is that they amassed this $2.6 billion debt, and I call it $4 billion, because in real terms, the money that we borrowed is to pay their bills. In that same period, they actually received in value-added tax an additional $1 billion in revenue.
How much?
$1 billion in additional tax. New money, $1 billion. So again, being conservative, Mr. Speaker, being conservative, they added, in real terms, $3.6 billion to the debt. Because if it wasn't for the $1 billion offset from the revenue from VAT, that's what it would have been.
Big spender.
And if you add the $1.4 billion that I ascribe to them, they now well $5 billion in 5 years. $1 billion a year.
$1 billion a year.
$1 billion a year. In real terms.
$1 billion government.
How many zeros in the billion?
$1 billion.
And they want to come here with crocodile tears to talk about why we have to put 12%. And take no responsibility for it. No responsibility. Oh, y'all in there today, y'all raised the tax by 4.5%. Oh, the sky is going to fall. Mr. Speaker, you see, there's some cold realities. Okay, there's some cold realities. Because I hear them saying that the Bahamian people don't believe us. They don't believe us at all. But you know what, Mr. Speaker? On May 10th, 2017, the Bahamian people gave their judgment. They said clearly who they believe. Because they sure didn't believe them, Mr. Speaker.
Welcome to the flow.
So, you know, don't come in here with the anecdotal, oh, they don't support you, or they don't believe you. Well, in May 2017, they didn't talk. They acted.
They were tired of Perry.
And for good reason.
That debt,
Mr.
Speaker, of course entails annual interest payments that must be paid out of the government's annual revenue collections. Between 2011, 2012, and the coming fiscal year, our interest payments, listen to this, our interest payments have doubled from $191 million to $381 million Bahamian hard-working people dollars.
Say it again. Say it again. Deputy.
Interest rates, interest payments, interest payments.
Read that again.
Just the interest. We ain't talking about paying down no debt.
Read that again.
All right? We ain't talking about paying down no debt. Okay?
Say that again. That's important.
It is important.
Listen.
Where am I?
Read that again.
Honorable members.
Let me deal with that one question now, because they throwing me off because I think they're trying to make sure I run out of time. But let me help them. Let me help Angliston, because Angliston is asking about how much I borrow, right? And I just explained to her. Oh, sorry, I take that back. My apologies. I explained to this house that we borrowed $1.4 billion. $1.4 billion. Now, let me help you. Let me in 1 year. Because let me help you. 400 million of that 1 billion was to pay bills that you, well, no, not you, sorry, the U.S. cabinet, but not you, that the former administration left on the table, owing, due, and payable. Small, hard-working contractors, lunch vendors, bus contracts, people who needed their money. Yeah, I come to that. Oh, I come to that. $400 million. Okay?
Honorable members.
No.
Honorable members.
Yeah, so at least they're now recognizing that they left the $400 million. They're admitting now that they left $400 million. But I got news for them. Don't jump up yet. Because I got more bills for you that you left behind. Yeah? So don't jump up yet. You see this book here? See this book?
Yes.
Boom. This got all kind of things in it. All kind of things.
You must have got table.
All of this. Okay? So of the 1.4, 400 million was to pay bills that were left when we came to office. That were disclosed, Mr. Speaker. That were disclosed. Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member.
No, I can give this to you. I can give this to you. I can give this to them.
But if you can. You left the bill, so you should know what they were.
Mr. Speaker.
You'll see them in the newspaper.
Mr. Speaker.
They'll be in the Punch tonight.
$400 million of past bills we had to borrow to pay.
Oh, yeah.
For ordinary, hard-working Bahamians, Mr. Speaker. People who could not get paid.
Contractors.
$750 million, and the member was talking about, we're talking about interest, and so I think she thought she had a point. $750 million, which was a bond offering that we went out to the international market to get, was to refinance existing debt.
But they didn't get that.
No new debt.
Existing
debt.
And a lower interest rate.
And at a lower interest rate.
Yeah. But they know that. No.
At a lower interest rate.
Save the Bahamian people somebody.
And then the final $322 million was to pay for the deficit in that budget.
Yeah. Their debt.
That's what it is. And the thing about the deficit, right? Right now we're projecting we can come in below the budgeted deficit.
And when was the last time a government did that?
Well, I just gave you the list. It certainly wasn't in the last 5 years. But Mr. Speaker, our interest payments are doubling from $191 million to $381 million. $381 million, Mr. Speaker. The relative, the bond helped. That'll tell you it would be more if we didn't do the bond issuance. Huh? No, you can go to the central bank and find it, right? Because what we did, and I'm sure you understand this part, I hope you do, we refinanced short-term loans. And you know short-term loans come with a higher interest rate, right? So we termed out and extended it, Mr. Speaker. I want you to understand, because it's important. Because if you don't understand, it means that the Bahamian people don't understand. So I want you to understand. I hide nothing from you. But Mr. Speaker, in relative terms, I tell you. I tell you, you'll find out. In relative terms, interest accounted for approximately 13 cents of every dollar in 2011 and 2012. In 2018, 2019, abstracting from the revenue measures announced, interest would have fully consumed 18 cents of every revenue dollar. So for every dollar that we earn, 18 cents is going to pay just interest. Just interest. Right? Before we do anything, before we pay the first teacher, the first doctor, the first nurse, we got to give 18 cents to the finance man. And yet, the opposition wants to tell us, oh, don't raise no more taxes. Oh, don't cut no salaries, don't cut nobody from the service, don't reduce no agencies. So just go out and borrow it. Spend, don't worry about it, just go and borrow.
You can't be saying shame.
And we're already at 18 cents on the dollar. Well, tell me, and I speak to the Bahamian people. You're smart. You're intelligent people. Unlike them, I believe in you. You tell me, how much do you believe
that you could spend on just interest out of your paycheck, not buying anything. How much do you think you can borrow and pay interest? Yes, I went to Hawksbill High School, and I'm very proud of it. So don't disrespect any public school in this country. Don't disrespect public schools. I went to the public school, and I'm very proud of the education I got. Very proud of the education I got there, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member.
That touches me, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member. The member Ferguson.
Yes,
on the point of order, state the point of order,
Yes,
please.
the point of order, Mr. Speaker, is that the member is suggesting that someone on this side is being disrespectful to Hawksbill High School in Grand Bahama, Speaker.
You raised it.
I think the point that was being raised is that we don't need condescension to the Bahamian people because we're very smart. And that's what the point was. And I was wondering which university the member went to, because he appears to have a greater form of intellect than most of us based on the nature of his conversation. No one was speaking to the high school, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, when you put your foot in your mouth, sometimes it's just best to sit down and let that go. Okay? Mr. Speaker, I don't know what the member is getting up for. I said when you put your foot in your mouth.
Honorable member.
You're talking about me.
What is your point of order, honorable member?
My point of order is the member is suggesting that by implication, he's suggesting that I said something which I'm saying I did not say or suggest, Speaker. And so the member, the only issue at hand is the member's dialogue to the Bahamian people. We understand he has, that he understands these issues very well. But I'm only pointing out that the Bahamian people are equally intelligent. That's the only point I'm making, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, again, I'm getting a little bit distracted, but let me just say, this is important to me. Because this speaks to me, and it speaks to the thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of Bahamian citizens, including some of the constituents and constituencies that we represent, that can't afford no fancy education, that go to public school.
What are you talking about?
The same people
What are you
who we are trying to empower here today with the skills training and all the rest of it, Mr. Speaker. This is important to me because this is my friends. These are people I know. And to suggest,
Honorable member,
Speaker, that they can't understand.
Honorable members, just a moment.
It's insulting.
Just a moment, honorable member. Honorable member, Ferguson. The chair had indicated earlier, with respect to shouting remarks across the floor, particularly unparliamentary and insulting remarks. So I'm requesting that you desist with shouting remarks that the member is being dishonest and is dishonest. Honorable member? Honorable member? Honorable member? Honorable member? The matter is finished. Resume your seat. Honorable member? Honorable member, resume your seat, please. The point.
I indicated to him I was not suggesting what he's saying, and he's now seeking to create some sort of dialogue based on something I said I did not say, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member.
On that basis, it's not honest, Mr. Speaker. An
Honorable
honorable
member.
man would not continue when a member said that she did not say that.
Honorable member, resume your seat. The chair is indicating, honorable member, that you are making and shouting comments from your seat, unsubstantiated insults and allegations. I'm asking you to desist with them. And when you are on your feet, I will request that you withdraw such remarks. You cannot accuse a member of being dishonest unless you substantiate the allegation. Up to this point in time, honorable member, you have not substantiated any allegation of being dishonest.
The member is, I will say it this way, Mr. Speaker, because I appreciate that we do not wish to speak about each other in that manner, Mr. Speaker. The member is, and this is the point I'm making, the point I was making is that the member is, and it was really from my seat, and I'm sorry it's coming out for the record, is speaking in a condescending way to the Bahamian people. And the comment was made,
honorable member. Yes, honorable.
No, Speaker. No.
Honorable members, resume your seat, honorable member. The point I'm trying to get across is when you rise on a point of order, not a point of opinion or your interpretation of what the member is saying, it is subjective for you to assess a statement as being condescending. That is very subjective. It may not be condescending to me or to any other member. But what I'm saying is that is a subjective analysis of what is being said. That does not fall in the category of a point of order. That is just your difference in opinion.
Said an interpretation which is not correct, and he's going further with the dialogue of it, and it's a bit offensive. But I withdraw the word dishonest, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member.
Thank you.
And again, you know, I'm sure that the member represents an indigenous foundation community, and so I'm sure that many of her constituents attend these schools, and so I'm sure that she would not want to suggest, and I'm sure she would not want. And I'm going in defense now, that you would not want to suggest to your constituents that the fact that they would have gone to no, not even let me say to go into a public school, but that they do not have the capacity to understand.
Honorable member.
Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member. Honorable member, resume your seat. You are not recognized by the chair. Resume your seat. Honorable member for East Grand Bahama, resume your seat. Let me make it clear. Let me make it clear. The chair will exercise its discretion as we proceed in this debate. The chair is trying to be as fair as possible to every member. I'm permitting members to dialogue across the floor once it doesn't rise to the level of being disruptive to the member who is speaking or disrespectful or insulting. I'm engaging and allowing members to debate. However, I cannot permit unparliamentary words, suggestions, phrases to be used by either side. And I would request now that members desist with that behavior and that we proceed to the material matter before us. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the bottom line is that the interest payment represents spending to service debt rather than to provide services to Bahamian citizens. As the debt burden gets larger, the siphoning off of precious financial resources away from government services to debt servicing grows even more onerous. That is why government deficits and debt should and do matter to every citizen. That is why our government is doing the right thing and moving decisively to both eliminate the annual deficit and reduce the burden of debt. Mr. Speaker, while our predecessors clearly failed miserably at fiscal management and did the nation a great disservice with the amount of debt that they piled onto the shoulders of our fellow citizens and future generations, they did talk a good game when it came to planned reforms. Indeed, as early as mid-year 2012, 2013,
in the budget statement delivered in February 2013, they announced an ambitious medium-term fiscal consolidation plan that featured important planned structural reforms to both expenditure and revenue, and that would lead to a balanced budget in 2016-2017. Yes, members, you did hear correctly. The GFS deficit under their plan was to be eliminated by 2016-2017.
3 years?
In 3 years. But if instead of delivering a balanced budget by 2016-2017, they, as customary, managed to take the deficit to unprecedented levels. That year alone, the year when we were supposed to have a balanced budget, we actually saw a deficit of a whopping $661 million. I don't know how that balanced. Among the planned revenue reforms were the establishment of a central revenue agency, the reform and modernization of both the real property tax system and customs operations, and the introduction of a value-added tax to bolster the revenue yield and contribute to achievement of the fiscal target in the medium-term plan, i.e. lower deficits and debt. On the expenditure side, efforts were to be devoted to restraining the growth of spending, including the restructuring and strengthening of the Ministry of Finance, in order to enhance its capacity to more effectively monitor the operations and expenditure of government, with higher levels of accountability and transparency. As well, the Ministry of Finance was directed to exert greater oversight of the fiscal affairs of public corporations to ensure that they strive for greater levels of efficiency and effectiveness. As early as the same 2013-2014 budget communication, they also spoke to the need to engage the private sector in the development and upgrade of public infrastructure through so-called PPPs, or P3 partnerships. In the 2014-15 budget communication, they stated that they had begun a review of public sector pension plans to address the fiscal viability, the financial viability of these plans over the longer term. They stressed that the projected growth in pension liabilities was simply unsustainable. Subsequently, the 2014-15 mid-year budget statement announced the commissioning of a discussion paper on fiscal responsibility legislation to be completed by summer of 2015. That same fiscal responsibility legislation that this government will table imminently, the same one that is out for public consultation and feedback, that piece of legislation that they had promised by the summer of 2015 and never drafted. Again, Mr. Speaker, this is where the F&M administration is different from the PLP administration. The other side will talk you to dizzy and deliver nothing at the end of the day, while we in the Free National Movement promise to do something, and we deliver it. The F&M administration promised that the fiscal responsibility legislation will be law this year. And God willing, it will be so. We are different than them, decidedly different than them. In the 2015-16 mid-year budget statement, the former PLP administration announced that a program of public financial management system reform was being launched, and with the financial support of the Inter-American Development Bank. In 2016-17 budget, they acknowledged that the need to bring about significant improvements in the domestic business environment, based on the country's ranking in the World Bank Ease of Doing Business Index. Mr. Speaker, I've cited numerous examples of policy areas in which government action was vitally important for the sake of advancing critical national objectives and improving the welfare of the nation. I need not belabor the point any further, only to conclude that by and large, the previous government failed to deliver on the actions that they had promised to implement in these very important areas. Specifically, their medium-term fiscal consolidation plan did not lead to a balanced budget. In fact, very far from it. They failed to restrain the growth of recurrent expenditure, which grew steadily during the mandate from 15.1% of GDP in 2013-14 to 19.6% of GDP in 2016-17. They failed to establish a fully functioning central revenue agency and to fully reform and modernize the real property tax and customs. They did introduce the value-added tax, but failed to utilize the almost $1.5 billion collected during the first 2.5 years of the tax to reduce the deficit and debt. Instead, they made the deficit and the debt much worse, boosting spending in areas not fully accounted for. They did not complete the proposed restructuring and strengthening of the Ministry of Finance and the full implementation of the IDB project to reform the public financial management system. They failed to address the efficiency concerns identified in respect of the state-owned enterprises. On the issue of public-private partnerships for infrastructure development, the record shows that in the majority of cases, the work was performed without a contract, and that the memorandum of understanding, or MOUs, through which they represented simple off-book loans at 8%, when the government could have borrowed the funds involved at much lower rates. Let me say that again. PPPs, private-public partnerships, entered into by memorandums of understanding at loan rates of 8%, when the government could have borrowed the money for the infrastructure development for less. Moreover, while an established PPP policy and legal framework was promised to guide and oversee all such partnerships, that simply never happened. As well, the scope of works was not reviewed or signed off by the Ministry of Works or other qualified public officers in many instances. And there was no transparency whatsoever in the selection and award of public-private partnership contracts. They completely dropped the ball on the issue of public sector pension reform. The discussion paper on fiscal responsibility, more specifically fiscal rules, was buried within the 2015-2016 budget communication, and they never pursued the public discussion promised on the draft bill. Their action to improve the ease of doing business was just not up to the task, as our ratings deteriorated further under their watch, from 85th to 106th out of 190 in 2016, and then to 121st in 2017. Mr. Speaker, they talk a good game, indeed, but miserably fail to score when it counts. They're still trying to talk a good game while in opposition, but their reputation for failure weighs them down, and their pronouncements are simply devoid of meaning. And then, without any semblance of shame, after taking in the people's value-added tax revenues and making the debt and the deficit exponentially larger and leaving a mounting of bills behind, they have the temerity, the gall, to be outraged that this administration is actually cleaning up the mess that they made of our fiscal situation. They believe the public forgets. You see, some still living in the age where they don't believe or they don't recognize that social media and the news reports are not just in some newspaper that you can't read online and you can forget about. Today, people may not remember, but very quickly they will go to social media and Google it. So people don't forget what happened in the last 5 years. They know exactly. That's why y'all could come here and tell me what I said in 2014.
They forget what they say.
That the people do not know who wrecked the fiscal house and created this untenable situation that Bahamians will now have to make even more additional sacrifices to fix. They in the PLP should be indeed outraged, but they should be outraged with what they see in the mirror, knowing full well that their irresponsibility is what has led to us having no choice but to increase the value-added tax rate. Our government has a clearly articulated agenda for inclusive growth, social progress, environmental sustainability, public sector reform, and fiscal redress that we set out in our manifesto prior to the election. We began the implementation of that agenda upon coming to office, and we continue to do so judiciously, in line with the fiscal resources that are available within the overall fiscal redress plan that we are pursuing. The overriding immediate priority must be to bring the public finances to a responsible and sustainable state by paying off and getting behind us the mountain of arrears and unpaid bills that we have discovered since coming to office. Fully instituting proper budgeting for known commitments, including accrual accounting, such that arrears never again materialize. Responsibly financing the highest priority initiatives in our agenda. And finally, eliminating the GFS deficit in the shortest time practicable, in effect, over 3 fiscal years. To achieve all of that, we have developed a fiscal strategy that, unlike the previous government's medium-term fiscal consolidation plan, comprises concrete and specific actions that will secure the attainment of our objectives. Specifically, in the 2018-19 budget, we have held a very tight rein on recurrent expenditure, other than allocating $172 million to the payment of a large first tranche of arrears, a further $76 million to the proper budgeting of known spending obligations, and $89 million for additional interest payments. We have essentially kept all other recurrent expenditures constant. That's important. This is where your additional VAT money is going. This is that 4.5% that we're asking you for. It's going to pay $172 million in the first tranche, because there's a total of $360 million that's still outstanding of past bills from previous administrations. We're going to pay $172 million of that. We're going to pay $76 million in properly budgeting known commitments. It's amazing to me that you know that you've entered into a contract, whether it's a service contract, a good contract, or a rental lease contract, and you don't put it in the budget.
No provision.
Just close your eyes and say, that ain't happened. But you budget, you already entered the contract, you know it exists. How could you not put it in the budget? It is actually. Yeah. For additional interest payments, we have essentially kept all recurrent expenditures constant, with the reallocation to fund the small number of select priority initiatives that we announced in the communication, totaling some $19 million. In fact, 24 of the 53 heads, excluding interest payments, saw reductions in their budget allocations, and 3 were given an increase under 1.5%. Of course, we also cut our spending on both the wage bill and goods and services in the current fiscal year by 10.3%, or $120 million.
Wonderful.
That, Mr. Speaker, is responsible budget making and financial management.
Thank you very much.
The focused recurrent expenditure initiatives are targeted at promoting enhanced growth and skills development, such as the $5 million in support for SME development and $4 million for college students recruitment. We're going to modernize this public service. We're going to bring in new skills, fresh ideas, and we're going to give opportunities to young college graduates who, up to this time, felt that there's no place for them. We're going to refresh this system. We need to. The $2.6 million for BTPI scholarships and the $5 million for inclusive growth in heritage or foundation communities. As well, we are striving to promote the diversification of our economy through both digital economy and the blue economy. to enhance trade opportunities through membership in the World Trade Organization, and to provide growth-supportive public infrastructure investments. We are proceeding with the long-standing plan to transform the Ministry of Finance and reactivating the IDB project to reform the public financial management system. We are moving to reform and modernize the state-owned enterprises such that they become significantly more efficient and self-sufficient. We are pushing ahead with the fundamental structural reform of real property tax and customs, both of which are in need of modernization, such that they can efficiently serve the public and properly generate the revenue streams they should. To that end, we are re-energizing the Revenue Enhancement Unit that had become dormant under previous administration. In the interim, the Real Property Tax and Customs Administration have been given direction to shape up their operations to the maximum extent feasible in order to generate an additional $80 million in revenue in the 2018-19 fiscal year. We have acted to address the many deficiencies in domestic business environment through the appointment of a private sector-led committee to make recommendations for improving the ease of doing business. In response, we have launched a major reform of the business license system that I outlined in the communication, and that will be fully operational in early 2019. The government is also following up on the other major recommendations to improve the business environment through administrative improvements and legislative amendments that will be tabled with the budget, or were tabled with the budget. We announced in the communication that we would engage the unions and major stakeholders in discussions on the issues of sustainable pension reform. We have established a sinking fund for the $750 million international bond issued late last year, to which we will contribute $39 million in 2018-2019 fiscal year. Such funds, of course, prudently provide for the repayment of bonds when they mature, thereby reducing future financing pressures. So not only did we go out and borrow to pay off these debts that we had no money to pay, these loans, but now that we have refinanced them, we're putting aside money every year to ensure that when they mature, the funds are available to pay them, and we do not have to engage in borrowing again to pay off loans. We've also moved to secure insurance in the event of significant damage from future hurricanes through the Caribbean Catastrophic Risk Financing Facility, CRIF. It will be recalled that the previous administration irresponsibly canceled our country's coverage under the CRIF, and as a result, deprived us of a significant payout in the wake of Hurricane Matthew. As our request, CRIF has provided new coverage for, listen to this, CRIF has provided new coverage for government infrastructure based on 3 island segments in order to cater to our unique archipelagic nation. So what they've done is that we've been able to convince them that we should separate the Bahamas into 3 zones. The southern zone, which is very sparsely populated, does not have a lot of public infrastructure. The central part, which includes New Providence, that has a lot of infrastructure. And then the northern part, Abaco, Grand Bahama, and Bimini, which has slightly less than what we have here in the capital. And what that will do is it makes the ability, the threshold for making a claim, much lower in these less populated areas. So Ragged Island, the next time this happens, that something happens to a Ragged Island, we will be able to call on the CRIF because they would be able to assess that based upon the infrastructure in that zone. And so they will be able to get a payout. And similarly through the other regions. Because right now, the way that, or previously how the policy was working, is that in order for us to get a payout in any part of the country, you almost had to have a major hit on New Providence. And so we have, so they're saying that well, again, I shouldn't be talking to them. But again, we recognize that under the previous administration, and the reason and rather than trying to renegotiate the policy, as we have done, they canceled it wholesale.
Yep.
So they threw the baby out with the bathwater. Rather than going to CRIF and saying, hey, this doesn't work for us, give us a program that works, they threw it out. And it left us exposed, Mr. Speaker. This program that we have negotiated with the CRIF gives us the best possible coverage and the opportunity for return if, in fact, you have the unthinkable event, catastrophic event again. Mr. Speaker, that coverage will cost $3.4 million in 2018-19. In addition, we plan to establish a debt relief fund during this term, to which we will make annual contribution of sufficient size to build up a fund to assist with future rebuilding requirements in the wake of natural disaster. So not only do we have the insurance, but we're putting aside funds, a percentage of our budget, in a fund for the assistance in rebuilding efforts, so that we don't have to go out and borrow, hopefully, when we have a major event. We will have some money set aside to assist residents with repairs and getting their lives back to normal. We developed and tabled fiscal responsibility legislation that establishes concrete principles and procedures for responsible fiscal management and facilitates parliamentary and public scrutiny of the fiscal performance of the government. And we provided for an increase in the rate of value-added tax that will be just sufficient to generate the additional revenue needed to fill the grave fiscal gap that we faced in developing this year's budget. With the expenditure restraints that we have imposed, those monies will not be wasted on new discretionary spending by the government, but rather will contribute directly to the elimination of the GFS deficit in short order and move to a lower burden of debt. As well, we have passed the 2018 fiscal year with a large portion of the arrears cleared. As well, after we passed the 2018-19 fiscal year budget, with a large portion of the arrears cleared, that's $172 million that I talked about that we're going to pay this year, we estimate that we will be in a position in 2019-20 to begin giving back to the Bahamian consumer in the form of further reductions in customs and excise duties, followed by yet more such deductions in 2021. So it's a 3-year plan. This year, we are going to collect roughly, I think it's $400 million in additional tax, which will give us the opportunity to pay down these arrears, to have a proper budgeting exercise so we don't run out of money and push people off and cause them to go into trouble because they can't get the money. And once we go to the next year, that $172 million that we would have paid this year will become available for us to reduce further customs and excise taxes, as well as introduce some other programs. And then in the following year, when we would have achieved our goal of a surplus budget, we'll be able to even give more back to the Bahamian people. So this is a payment plan, if you will. This is a people's budget, right? All of us who would have run up our credit card or fallen into financial difficulty, we know we go to the bank and they tell us, this is your payment plan. Pay a little bit every month. And so you have to take that out of your pocket. You can't do the things that you used to do because you got to pay on that debt. But as soon as you pay it, all of a sudden you have more money back in your pocket to be able to do the things that you used to do or that you want to do. That's the plan. We need to pay down some of this debt so that we give ourselves an opportunity to invest in the things and the services that are important to the Bahamian people. The decisions made with respect to the 2018-19 budget were not made lightly or without painstaking analysis and deliberation. The government, believe it or not, did not take the easy way out. Increasing taxes is not the easy way out. We were faced with a set of extraordinary circumstances, and we choose to act responsibly, to pursue every available option we had, even the unpopular ones. You know, again, Mr. Speaker, you know, I just want to put that there. Mr. Speaker, ours is a government of action, done in a transparent accountable, and responsible way.
Take your time, take your time. You got plenty.
As this truly is the people's budget, we have told Bahamians about how grave the fiscal position actually is because of the irresponsible fiscal management of our predecessors. We have told them why it is imperative that we address this matter with the most urgency for the sake of enhancing confidence in the Bahamas as a desirable place for more buoyant domestic and foreign investment and the resulting stronger growth and job creation. We have told them frankly what is required to permanently fix the problem and sacrifices that we all need to make to do just that. Unlike the opposition, we do not sugarcoat the situation. We do not create unrealistic expectations. And we believe that the Bahamian people have the capacity to understand the significance and the seriousness of where we are. And unlike them, we follow up on what we say we will do. We serve the people, and we strive to give them the responsible government that they deserve. Mr. Speaker, I will now elaborate on a number of key issues that flow from last week's budget communication. I will begin with the overall theme of the 2018-19 budget and the fiscal policy stance that it embodies. I believe that it is important to stress that this is a budget that ultimately is about bolstering inclusive economic growth and job creation and enhancing the standard of living of all Bahamians. It's not simply about reducing fiscal deficits and getting the debt burden on a downward path merely for the sake of doing so, although that is critically important. The reality is that eliminating the deficit and getting us on a lower burden of government debt are critical requirements to creating a healthy macroeconomic environment within which Bahamian entrepreneurship and investments can flourish, especially in the small and medium-sized sector, which is the renowned engine of stronger growth and job creation. And I'm sure my former colleague from the Chamber of Commerce would agree with me. Creating the fiscal space within which the government can responsibly finance the vital services that the Bahamians expect of their government, as well as the critical public infrastructure to support stronger growth potential in the economy. Governments in this country have perennially talked about the critical need to reduce and eventually eliminate the deficit, and of the critical need to put order in the public finances and reduce the burden of debt to lower, more desirable levels. However, for various reasons, the desired results have invariably failed to materialize as envisioned. In this context, I would challenge honorable members to recall a year when the Bahamian government ran a balanced budget. I can tell you that you would have to think long and hard to come up with one single example. As a result, one deficit after another has been recorded, with the mountain of government debt getting higher and higher every year and approaching the critical limit. At the post-budget press conference last week, I explained that there are examples abroad that amply demonstrate the very real economic and social costs that are imposed on a society when they reach that limit. Recourse to capital markets is severely constrained. Interest rates soar to punishing levels, affecting not only the government, but the private sector as well, depressing economic activity and jobs. And to give you a real example of that, when the last downgrade happened, NAD, the National Airport Development Company, had a call on its loan. They had to pay money in to support its loan. The government had a call on its foreign exchange swaps, and it had to put in $70 million to support that loan. So this idea about not worrying about the credit rating and, just go borrow. It has real consequences. Real consequences. And I'm sure my friend from Exuma, who's in the insurance business and knows about ratings and how important that is to his business, and how the country's ratings will have an effect on his ratings, how important it is for us to get our fiscal house in order. There is one of our neighbors in the region right now is at risk of losing investments that are in their country today. Not because they're doing anything different, but because their credit rating has gotten to the point now where people are unwilling to support them. And so those major corporations that are in their country are looking to move. They want to get out because not only is it an effect on their own company, those private companies now, on their own cash value, the value of their cash or their assets, but it also has an effect on their ratings. And some of these are international companies. And so they're looking to get out because they can't be attached to that stigma. That's what we're trying to prevent here in this country. We're trying to catch our financial system, our financial crisis, before it hits the tipping point, and we are unable to control the spiral that comes afterwards. That's what this is about. This ain't about trying to show up nobody and trying to prove a point. This is about trying to save our country from some serious pain, from an uncontrolled situation that will bring, or has the potential to bring, significant consequences with it.
Negative.
Government is then held to ransom, so to speak, and obliged to implement draconian cuts to critical spending programs and key public services. The havoc that is thereby brought on by an economy and a society can be devastating, and the adjustments out of that crisis can be extremely painful and take many years indeed. As all of you would know, the experience of Greece since the fiscal financial crisis presented a most striking example of the economic and social cost that can result from the need to implement drastic fiscal adjustments. In the wake of stringent fiscal consolidation programs that the Greek government was obliged to implement, the Greek economy contracted by more than 25% from its level in 2008. Investments shrank by more than 60%, and unemployment rose to the highest level in the Eurozone at over 27%. That's what we're trying to prevent here. We don't want to get to that situation. Because I hear the business community, I hear the Chamber of Commerce talking about what this 12% is going to do to the prospects of growth. But look at the Greece example. And look at the Barbadian example. These are real live cases. So what? You want to experience it for yourself before you act? You want to experience it yourself first? Or do you want to take corrective action?
I'm not accustomed to proactive.
Once you hit the tipping point and you start to come on the other side, the corrective measures are a lot more dramatic.
Draconian.
A lot more uncomfortable,
Painful.
a lot more painful than what we're trying to do today. We're in control of our situation. The country is still doing okay. And this is when you act. You don't wait till things get bad and try to act. You can't do that. And so when I listen to the Chamber of Commerce and Mr. Bowe and all these people who have so much to say, and I've asked them, give me your solution. You smart, tell me what to do.
What they say?
I'm still waiting.
Oh, so the people vote you all then?
Oh, I see.
As we also know full well, small island economies in the region have also had to deal with very difficult deficit and debt situation. And in that context, I do want to express my sincere concern for and solidarity with the newly elected government of the people of Barbados in the wake
of the government's announcement last week that given the dire economics, fiscal, and debt situation that it faces, it has no choice. Listen to those words. It has no choice but to suspend debt payments and seek the assistance of the IMF in support of the challenging and difficult economic and fiscal rebuilding efforts that will be required. You all hear that? They have no choice.
In the hands of the finance.
They can't pay. According to them, they have to suspend payments. The Bahamas has been lucky. We have never defaulted on any of our loans. Never defaulted. We've never been in the hands of the IMF. We've been lucky. We've been lucky. But if we continue to borrow, if we don't raise taxes, if we want to pay our commitments, don't raise taxes, you got to borrow. And anybody that has a loan, and there are many Bahamians today who have lost their job or suffered some setback, and they know what happens when they can't make that mortgage payment. They lose everything. Some people in their later stages of their lives don't have an opportunity to recover. What do we do as a country? Actually, what do we do as a country? Do we wait? Do we go another year and borrow another $700 million?
Oh my God.
Bump up the interest rates to another $80 million?
Sounds like 460.
When do you think you get to the point that you do not have the ability to service that loan anymore? It's because that point comes. Because while you have the debt payment to pay, or in the case of a household, the mortgage payment to pay, you still have the children to feed. You still have to pay the light bill. You still have to do all of these things. And so you keep borrowing, keep borrowing, keep borrowing. Interest rates going up, interest payments going up. At some point, you will get to that stage where you're forced to pay that, and so you got to cut something else. And so the services that the government provides, if we continue to borrow, will eventually have to be cut.
Not to mention layoffs.
We have to lay off people. You have to reduce services, goods. And while we can sit in our ivory towers, and sit in our businesses and say, well, cut expenses. Because that's what we would do in the private sector. We faced with a problem where our revenue is decreasing. We can cut some people. We can cut some costs. Government doesn't have that luxury. It's because it's self-defeating anyway. Because as you cut people, they go from the working payroll, they go to social services. So you don't fix the problem. You still got the same debt. You see, again, and I'm glad you asked Exuma and Cat Island why we let them go. You see, unlike what you've done in the past, let me answer you. Unlike what you've done in the past, of putting people on these 3 million, on these 3-month contracts, and these 6-month contracts, and these year contracts. Yeah? I'm going to give you the answer, though, because I know you're going to ask it. Right? Instead of putting them in a situation where they have some security and some tenure, you give them these little measly contracts where they got to come and beg, oh, Mr. Minister, please, can you give me another contract? Could you extend my contract, please? Yeah? You give them no long-term stability. Right? Because you want them dependent. I ain't ashamed to say it, and I ain't afraid to say it. You want them dependent on you. What we're doing is we're saying to these 52-week workers and others, we want to empower you. We want to give you an opportunity. And that is why we are putting our money where our mouth is in terms of training. That's where we put our money where our mouth is in terms of business support.
And that's why we're putting our money where our mouth is in terms of providing capital for small business. Because we don't want them to be dependent on us. You know, just like the Hubert Ingram administration opened the airwaves. From a political point of view, that was the worst thing we could have done. Because everybody nowadays has a voice to criticize. Everybody. Tell you all about yourself every day because they're smarter than you. But it was the right thing to do. And similarly, this administration is going to empower a whole generation of people. That over the hill initiative, and we got to execute that properly, Prime Minister.
You don't go with that.
because that, Prime Minister, is going to be a transformational project in this country.
Yes.
I congratulate you for coming up with it. That is going to change the lives and the course of people. I mean, the most, you know, and Engliston you should really clap on this one.
Be celebrating.
You should clap. These are your people. I don't want you to deal with me. No, I don't want you to deal with me. I want you to speak to the people. Yeah, don't you deal with me. I can be okay. Speak to the people. But it's these people that we're talking about, giving them a hand up, giving that man who feels bad about himself and so he mad at the world an opportunity. Eh? No, because y'all wouldn't let him listen. You want to walk out in the labor march. You want to walk out because you don't want them here. The truth. But they can hear the truth. They can hear the truth. You see, because empowering them makes them less dependent on us. And you know what that does? Just like opening the radios, it makes every one of us vulnerable. Because knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. And being out the hands of the finance man, being out of the hands of the finance man, makes the young, I use this, excuse me if I'm wrong, Rodney Munker, the young black Negro male and female, a lethal weapon. A lethal weapon. Because now they are armed. You know, 43 or 44 years of existence. And people still dependent on politicians. Listen, all of us who've been here for years, we should hang our heads in shame. In shame. In shame. You know, Central and South Andres, every time he speaks, he talks about the fact that his people in South Andres can't watch TV because there ain't no infrastructure. What the educational infrastructure looks like, the roads. And we think it's okay. We want to talk about the corrective measures that we're trying to make. Hard decisions. You want to criticize that? Now listen, Bahamian people, this budget is about you. This is the people's budget. And I encourage you to read it from front to back. Read it. Because there is lots in this budget for you, the ordinary black Bahamian, white Bahamian, the ordinary Bahamian. There is something in this budget for you, from the young man to the young woman, to the mother and the father who are trying to make ends meet, to the middle class. There is something in this for you. Read it. And you know what? I invite you to hold us accountable. That's what the fiscal responsibility part of this is all about.
Happy to do so.
Hold us accountable. Yeah? Mr. Speaker, fortunately, our government debt situation is such that we are not at a critical crisis point yet. But with the seemingly intractable amount the annual deficits that have been incurred in this country for far too many years, the trend towards the limit is clearly in evidence, if corrective action is not taken. And again, you know, the issues of finance, how much more time do I have? 1 hour? Okay, good. The issues of finance, Mr. Speaker. Okay, just 2 seconds. The issues of public finance are you know, they can be complex for some people. Some people can't grasp it. But you know, when I talked about the cupboard being bare in 2016, 17, right? Or 17, 18, sorry. When I talked about the cupboard bare, I didn't say that the government of the Bahamas would not be able to meet its commitments. What I said was, when I go and I open the checkbook to see what I have to spend, that there's no money there. In fact, and I'm trying to remember the number, but it was $200 million with red ink. We had to go immediately and borrow some money to put some money in the treasury so we could write a check. In fact, not even write a check, just let the checks that already been written clear. 400 million. 400 million. 400 million. So when I say the cupboard bare, the cupboard was bare. We had to go borrow some money to put in it. Mr. Speaker, so as we promised to the Bahamian people, our government has taken up the challenge of finally putting the national fiscal house in order. We firmly believe that the best course of action for our country and its future prosperity is to act decisively now to put government right, instill sound fiscal management, eliminate the deficit, and move the debt burden to lower levels. That is the key to strong growth and job creation over time, and it is the reason that we have chosen to act at this time.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, I think this is an ample place for us to break for the lunch recess, and so I do move that the House do suspend until 3 p.m. today.
Second. It's been moved and seconded that the business of this House do suspend until 3 p.m. this afternoon. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House stands suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon.
Well, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, who is the Member of Parliament for East Grand Bahama, Peter Turnquest, giving the second reading of the budget bills and, in effect, starting off the debate of the budget. As you know, it has to be passed in the House of Assembly, then the Senate, and get the Governor General's assent, all before July 1st, when the new fiscal year begins. Well, Mr. Turnquest blaming the PLP government expenditure for the need to raise VAT, and he challenged the leader of the opposition, Philip Brave Davis, the MP for Cat Island, Rum-Key, San Salvador, if he would tell the Bahamian people that he would reverse the VAT rate if they came to power. Well, Mr. Davis said that there's no need to raise VAT now in this budget or in any budget in the near future. He said this on a point of order. Well, Mr. Turnquest gave examples as to how the PLP administration overshot the budget by millions of dollars, including 2016 and 2017, while the economy continued to shrink. Now, Chester Cooper said that the stats that were being given were correct, but they were being used in a misleading way. Mr. Turnquest also added that the interest rates doubled under the PLP, but he says now with this new budget, the FNM government is going to modernize the public service, provide new skills and opportunities for young people. He gave more details of the government's 3-year plan, moving towards a balanced and eventually a surplus budget. He also highlighted further reduction in customs and excise taxes along the way. He says that the government is trying to prevent a financial crisis. Mr. Turnquest also says that there's a lot of relief on bread basket items, which will help the most vulnerable of people, and said that tuna will now be added to bread basket items. He says that we are going through a period that he calls a period of shared sacrifice. Now, also speaking today was the Prime Minister and the Minister of Education, Jeff Lloyd, both of whom gave condolences regarding the victims of the Labor Day tragedy. The Prime Minister has urged the public not to engage in idle speculation and to wait until investigations have concluded. Well, the House of Assembly will resume its proceedings at 3 p.m. Join us then. Until then, I'm Julian Reed. Good afternoon.